Marco de Leon had always believed that some dreams were meant for other people. At 52, the widowed mechanic spent his days beneath car hoods in his small coastal garage. His world shrunk to the size of his modest town and his 16-year-old daughter Sofia's needs. When a vintage Bentley broke down outside his shop that foggy October evening, he expected just another repair job. But Catherine Whitmore, the elegant woman behind the wheel, saw something in Marco's gentle expertise with her cherished car. After he coaxed the engine back to life with tender precision, she made an offer that left him speechless. Join her on a journey around the world, maintaining her collection of classic cars while she searched for the music her injured hands could no longer play. What happens when a struggling father must choose between the safety of his small world and the adventure of a lifetime? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt air carried the sound of Sofia's piano through the open windows of De Leon's full-service garage, mixing with the distant crash of Pacific waves against the rocky coastline below. Marco wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag and stepped back from the Ford pickup he'd been working on since dawn, listening to his daughter practice scales in their apartment above the shop. Each note drifted down like a prayer, precise and hopeful, reminding him of Elena's fingers dancing across their old upright piano years ago. The garage sat at the edge of Moonlight Bay, California, a town that tourism had forgotten and progress had passed by. Marco's father had built the business in 1967, back when full service meant something and customers expected their windshields cleaned and oil checked with every fill-up. Now, most people drove to the gleaming stations by the highway, where they could pump their own gas and grab a coffee without speaking to another human being. But Marco kept the old ways alive, checking tire pressure without being asked, knowing his regulars by the sound of their engines, remembering birthdays and anniversaries with handwritten notes tucked under windshield wipers. At 52, Marco had the hands of a man who'd spent 34 years coaxing life from metal and machinery. His fingers were permanently stained with grease, his knuckles scarred from countless repairs, but those same hands could diagnose a problem with the gentleness of a doctor taking a pulse. He'd inherited more than just the business from his father. He'd inherited the gift of understanding what engines needed to sing again. The apartment above the garage was modest but clean, furnished with pieces Elena had chosen from second-hand shops and estate sales, each item selected for its story rather than its price. The living room walls were covered with Sofia's school photos and awards, her sheet music scattered across the coffee table like fallen leaves. Elena's piano, a 1952 Baldwin upright with ivory keys yellowed by time, dominated the small space. It was the one luxury Elena had insisted on when they married, purchased with money she'd saved from her job at the town library. "Papa, does this sound right?" Sofia called from upstairs, her fingers picking out a melody that made Marco's chest tighten with recognition. "Sounds beautiful, Mia," he called back, though she couldn't see the way he touched the wedding ring he still wore on a chain around his neck. Elena's ring. He'd never been able to bring himself to remove it from his finger until 2 years ago, when Sofia had gently suggested that maybe Mama would want him to be happy again. 3 years had passed since the cancer took Elena. 3 years of Marco learning to braid Sofia's hair and help with algebra homework, of burning dinner and staying up late sewing costumes for school plays. He'd become both mother and father, protector and provider, though some months the providing felt more like barely surviving. The garage kept them fed and housed, but there was never enough left over for extras. Music lessons had ended when Elena got sick, and Sofia had learned to play by ear and YouTube videos ever since. Marco heard a car engine struggling up the coastal road that led to his garage, a distinctive sound that made him pause. It wasn't the steady purr of a well-maintained vehicle or the rough growl of something needing attention. This was different, refined, but labored, like an opera singer fighting a cold. He stepped outside into the October evening, fog beginning, to roll in from the ocean, and watched as a vintage Bentley appeared through the mist. The car was magnificent, even in distress. A 1965 Silver Cloud 3 in midnight blue, its chrome gleaming despite the moisture in the air. It rolled to a stop beside his pumps with the grace of old money and careful maintenance, though Marco could hear the irregular heartbeat of an engine that wasn't firing on all cylinders. The woman who emerged from the driver's seat moved with the same elegant deliberation as her car. She was perhaps his age or slightly older, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a way that suggested sophistication rather than vanity. Her clothes were simple but expensive, the kind of understated quality that spoke of means without shouting. About it, most striking were her hands, long-fingered and graceful, though Marco noticed she held them carefully, as if they pained her. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent Marco couldn't place. "I'm Catherine Whitmore. I'm afraid my car has developed some concerning symptoms over the past 50 miles. Marco approached the Bentley with the reverence he reserved for truly special machines. Marco de Leon, he introduced himself already, listening to the engine's labored idle. "What kind of symptoms are we talking about, Miss Whitmore?" "It's Mrs. though. I suppose that's not quite accurate anymore," Catherine said with a small smile that held depths Marco recognized. "She started missing at highway speeds about an hour ago, and now she's running rough even at idle. The temperature gauge has been climbing, though not into the danger zone yet." Marco popped the hood and peered into the immaculate engine bay. Even in distress, the Bentley's heart was a thing of beauty, all polished chrome and careful engineering, from an era when cars were built to last generations. He touched nothing yet, just observed, letting his eyes and ears tell him the story. "When did you last have the fuel system serviced?" he asked, noting the slight smell of fuel that shouldn't be there. 6 months ago, in San Francisco," Catherine replied, "though I'll admit, I've been driving her harder than usual lately. More miles in the past month than in the previous year combined." "Running from something or toward something?" Marco asked, gently, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was the kind of personal inquiry his father had warned him about. Stick to the mechanical problems. Leave the human ones alone. Catherine studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to share with this small-town mechanic. "Both, I suppose," she said finally. "I've been driving the coast, looking for something I'm not sure exists anymore." Marco nodded, understanding more than she might expect. He'd seen it before, people using the open road to outrun grief, to chase something they'd lost or never found. "Well, let's get her into the bay and see what she needs. I've got a feeling it's nothing that can't be fixed." As he guided Catherine to park the Bentley inside the garage, Sofia's piano practice drifted down from above, the melody more complex now, her teenage fingers working through what sounded like a classical piece. Catherine paused at the bottom of the stairs leading to their apartment, her head tilted toward the music. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "Is that your daughter?" "Sofia." "Yes. She's 16, been playing since she was 7. Pride warmed Marco's voice, despite the ache of knowing how much more Sofia could accomplish with proper training. "She's got a gift, but I'm afraid I can't give her the lessons she deserves." Catherine's expression shifted, something careful, and considering crossing her features. "Would you mind if I listened while you work? I used to play myself." "Of course," Marco said, pulling his rolling toolbox toward the Bentley. "Fair warning, though, he practices every evening from 6 to 8. House rule since her mother passed. Elena always said music was the family business, even if the garage paid the bills." As Marco began his methodical examination of the Bentley's fuel system, Catherine settled onto an old wooden stool near the base of the stairs. Above them, Sofia's playing continued, moving from classical exercises to something more personal, more exploratory. Marco recognized the melody, one of the pieces Elena used to play, though Sofia had added her own variations, her own young interpretation of love and loss. The garage grew quiet, except for the sound of Marco's careful work. And Sofia's distant piano. Catherine watched him with the attention of someone who appreciated craftsmanship, noting how he handled each component with respect, how he listened to the engine sounds as intently as a musician tuning an instrument. "You have a gift too," Catherine observed after a while. "The way you touch your engine, it's like you're having a conversation." Marco glanced up from the fuel injector he was examining. "My father used to say that every engine has a voice. You just have to learn to listen. This old girl's been trying to tell someone that her fuel delivery system needs attention. But most mechanics these days just run diagnostics and replace parts until something works. And you don't?" "I listen first," Marco said simply. "Usually, she'll tell you exactly what's wrong if you pay attention." Catherine smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he'd seen from her. "I used to feel the same way about pianos. Every instrument has its own personality, its own way of singing." She flexed her fingers unconsciously and caught herself doing it and tucked her hands into her lap. "Used to?" Marco asked gently. Catherine hesitated, then held up her hands. "Arthritis, complicated by an old injury. I was a concert pianist for 30 years, but my performing days are behind me." There was acceptance in her voice, but also grief, the kind Marco knew intimately. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "That must be like losing a piece of yourself." "It was," Catherine admitted. "That's part of what I've been looking for on this drive, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not the person I've been my whole life." Marco nodded, understanding flooding through him. "Elena used to say that sometimes life breaks us down to rebuild us into something we didn't know we could become. I didn't believe her then, but I'm starting to think she might have been right." Above them, Sofia's playing had shifted again, this time to something Marco didn't recognize, a melody that seemed to be composing itself as she played, searching and questioning, full of the kind of longing that only comes from being 16. And feeling everything too deeply. Catherine stood and moved closer to the stairway, her musician's ear caught by the improvisation. "She's not playing from sheet music," she said wonderingly. "She's creating." "She does that sometimes," Marco said with quiet pride. Elena always said Sofia had the gift of finding music that didn't exist yet. The improvisation above them built to a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. A moment later, Sofia's voice called down, "Papa, I think I found something, but I can't finish. It feels like it's missing something important." Marco looked at Catherine, surprised to see tears glistening in her eyes. "Would you mind," she asked quietly, "if I went up and listened? I promise I won't overstep, but what she's playing, it reminds me of something I lost a long time ago." Something in Catherine's voice, in the careful way she held her damaged hands, told Marco this was about more than musical curiosity. He wiped his hands and nodded toward the stairs. "Sofia would love that. She hasn't had anyone to share her music with except me, and I'm afraid my ear isn't nearly as trained as it should be." As Catherine climbed the stairs, Marco returned to the Bentley's engine, but his attention was divided between the mechanical problem in front of him and the sounds from above. He heard Sofia's shy introduction, Catherine's gentle response, then the piano again, this time with 2 sets of hands. Catherine's damaged fingers carefully picking out harmonies, while Sofia played the melody she'd been searching for. The sound that filled the garage then was unlike anything Marco had heard since Elena died, complete, whole, beautiful, in a way that made his chest ache with recognition. It was the sound of broken things healing, of music finding its missing pieces, of connections forming across the spaces between people. Marco stood perfectly still beside the Bentley, a fuel line forgotten in his hands, listening to his daughter, and this mysterious woman create something neither could have found alone. For the first time in 3 years, The silence in his life felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. The next morning brought crystalline October sunshine that burned away the coastal fog and revealed the full scope of the Bentley's needs. Marco had arrived at the garage before dawn, as was his habit, but found himself moving with unusual anticipation, rather than routine resignation. The sound of Catherine and Sofia playing together the night before had stirred something in him that he'd thought permanently dormant. Catherine appeared at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street. "I hope you don't mind," she said, offering him one. "I'm an early riser by nature, and I thought you might appreciate some decent coffee while you work." Marco accepted the cup gratefully, surprised by the gesture's thoughtfulness. In his experience, wealthy customers either disappeared until their cars were ready or hovered impatiently, checking their watches every few minutes. Catherine did neither. She settled onto yesterday's wooden stool and watched him work with the quiet attention of someone genuinely interested in the process. "How long will she need?" Catherine asked, nodding toward the Bentley. "Most of today," Marco replied, running his fingers along a fuel line. "Your fuel system's more complicated than it needs to be. But that's how they built luxury cars in the 60s. Everything had to be perfect, even the parts no one would ever see." He paused, considering his words. "Sometimes I think that kind of craftsmanship is what's missing from the world now. Everything's designed to be replaced instead of repaired." "Is that why you keep the full-service model?" Catherine asked, "when everyone else has gone to self-serve?" Marco nodded, continuing his methodical inspection. "My father used to say that people need to feel cared for, not just serviced. When someone stops here, they're not just buying gas, they're buying a few minutes of human connection. Someone who notices when their tire pressure's low or their windshield needs cleaning." He smiled ruefully. "Of course, that philosophy doesn't exactly pay the bills in today's world." Catherine studied him thoughtfully. "How long have you been struggling financially?" The directness of her question caught Marco off guard. He was accustomed to people dancing around the obvious signs of his poverty, the patches on his work clothes, the ancient equipment in his garage, the careful way he counted change. "Since Elena got sick," he admitted. "Medical bills, lost work time, and then trying to keep everything together afterward. It adds up faster than you think." "And Sofia's music education?" "Ended 3 years ago." Marco's voice carried the weight of that sacrifice. "She understands, or at least she says she does. But I see how she looks at the music schools online, how she stops playing sometimes and just stares at her hands like they're tools she doesn't know how to use properly. Above them, as if summoned by their conversation, Sofia's morning practice began. But instead of her usual scales and exercises, she launched into the melody she'd been working on the night before, the piece that had felt incomplete until Catherine's harmony gave it structure. Catherine's expression shifted, something like recognition crossing her features. "Marco," she said carefully, "would you mind if I shared something with you? Something about why I'm really here, driving the coast alone?" Marco paused in his work, sensing that whatever Catherine was about to tell him would change the conversation's trajectory. "Of course." Catherine stood and walked to the bay doors, looking out at the ocean beyond the coastal road. "I've been a widow for 2 years," she said quietly. "My husband was a good man, but he was also much older than me, and when he died, I inherited more money than I know what to do with." She turned back to Marco. "The problem is, I also inherited a life that feels completely empty. No children, no family to speak of, and a career that ended when these hands decided they couldn't keep up with my ambitions anymore." She flexed her fingers unconsciously, then continued. "I've been driving for 3 weeks, staying in small towns, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And then last night, I heard Sofia playing, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might have found an answer." Marco felt a chill of premonition. "What kind of answer?" Catherine returned to her stool, leaning forward earnestly. "I have 6 vintage cars, Marco. Beautiful machines that deserve to be driven, to be seen, to be loved. I've been thinking about taking them on a grand tour Europe, South America, Asia, everywhere I've always wanted to go, but never had the time for when I was performing." "That sounds wonderful," Marco said cautiously, unsure where this was leading. "The problem is, I can't maintain them myself, and I don't trust just anyone with cars that valuable." Catherine's eyes met his directly. "But watching you work yesterday, seeing how you approach machinery with such respect and intuition, I think you're exactly what I've been looking for." Marco's hands stilled on the fuel injector he'd been cleaning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to offer you a job, Marco. Travel with me, maintain my cars, help me see the world. In return, I'd pay you more than you make here in a year, and Sofia could come with us. She could have music lessons with the best teachers in Vienna, Prague, London. She could see the places where the greatest composers lived and worked." The garage fell silent, except for Sofia's playing above them, her melody now flowing with the confidence that Catherine's harmony had given it. Marco stared at Catherine, certain he'd misunderstood. "You're offering to take us around the world?" "I am," Catherine said simply. "I know it sounds impulsive, even crazy, but I've learned that life is too short to second-guess the moments when something feels absolutely right." Marco's mind reeled with the impossibility of it all. "I can't just leave everything. The garage, the house, Sofia's school. The garage could be closed temporarily or leased to someone else," Catherine said gently. "Sofia could continue her education through tutoring or online programs. Many traveling families do it successfully. As for the house, it would be here when you return." "And if something goes wrong?" "If Sofia gets sick or homesick, or then we come home," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about trapping you, Marco. It's about offering you and Sofia opportunities that might not come again." Marco set down his tools and walked to the bay doors, staring out at the ocean that had bounded his world for 52 years. The rational part of his mind catalogued all the reasons Catherine's offer was impossible: the risk, the responsibility, the sheer audacity of abandoning his entire life for a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours. But another part of his mind, the part that had been slowly suffocating under the weight of bills and grief and limited possibilities, whispered that maybe Elena had been right about life, rebuilding people into something they didn't know they could become. "Why us?" he asked without turning around. "You could hire any mechanic, any tutor, because Sofia has a gift that—" "Shouldn't be wasted," Catherine interrupted. "And because you have something I've been missing for 2 years, you have purpose. You know how to take care of things, how to make them work, how to love them back to life. I've forgotten how to do any of that." Marco turned to face her, seeing vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "You're lonely, desperately," Catherine admitted. "But this isn't about my loneliness, Marco, or not entirely. It's about 3 people who might be able to help each other become something better than they are separately." Sofia's playing above them shifted again, this time to a piece Marco recognized, the unfinished lullaby he'd started writing for Elena during her pregnancy, the melody that had remained incomplete since her death. His throat tightened as he heard his daughter attempting to find an ending that had eluded him for 16 years. "She's playing Elena's song," he whispered. Catherine listened for a moment and moved to the foot of the stairs. "Sofia?" She called gently. "Would you mind if I joined you for a moment?" "Please," Sofia's voice drifted down, carrying a note of frustration. "I can't figure out how this should end." Catherine climbed the stairs, leaving Marco alone with his thoughts and the weight of an impossible decision. He heard the piano bench creak as 2 people settled onto it, then Sofia's tentative beginning of the lullaby again. This time, when she reached the place where the melody had always broken off, Catherine's fingers found the missing notes. The completion was so perfect, so inevitable, that Marco felt his knees weaken. The harmony Catherine added didn't just finish the song, it transformed it, turning a lullaby of grief into something richer and more complex. A song that acknowledged loss while embracing hope. Above him, Sofia gasped with delight. That's it. That's exactly what it needed. How did you know? Sometimes, Catherine's voice floated down, the missing piece finds you when you're ready for it. Marco closed his eyes, Alana's words echoing in his memory. Music is the family business, even if the garage pays the bills. For 3 years, he'd forgotten that Elena had dreams for Sofia that extended far beyond their small town. Dreams that Marco's love and protection couldn't fulfill alone. When Catherine and Sofia descended the stairs together, both glowing with the satisfaction of musical collaboration, Marco was waiting for them. His decision crystallized as he watched Sofia's animated face, seeing possibility there instead of resignation for the first time in years. If we did this, he said carefully, if we actually did this insane thing, what would happen to Sofia's education, her future? Catherine's smile was gentle but confident. She'd have the best music education money can buy, tutoring in multiple languages, exposure to art and culture that most people only dream of. And when we return, she'd be ready for any conservatory in the world. Sofia looked between them, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Papa, are you actually considering this? Marco looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Elena's dreams reflected in her eyes. He thought about the college applications hidden in Sofia's drawer, the ones they couldn't afford to send. He thought about the music lessons that had ended, the opportunities that slipped away a little more each day. I'm considering it, he said quietly, then turned to Catherine. But I need time to think. This is Sofia's life we're talking about, not just some adventure. Of course, Catherine said. Take all the time you need. I'll be staying at the Moonlight Inn for the next few days while you finish with the Bentley. No pressure, no timeline, just an opportunity if you want it. As Catherine prepared to leave, Sofia impulsively reached out and hugged her. Thank you, she whispered, for finishing Mama's song. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she returned the embrace. Thank you for letting me hear it in the first place. After Catherine left, Marco and Sofia stood together in the garage, the weight of possibility hanging between them like the coastal fog that would roll in with evening. The Bentley sat partially disassembled, its elegant engine exposed and vulnerable, waiting for Marco's careful hands to make it whole again. Papa, Sofia said softly, do you think Mama would want us to go? Marco touched the chain around his neck, where Elena's ring rested against his heart. For the first time since her death, he could imagine her voice clearly, could almost feel her hands pushing him gently toward a future he'd never dared to envision. I think, he said carefully, your Mama would want us to be brave enough to let the music finish itself. The 3 days that followed Catherine's offer passed in a strange suspension of time, as if the normal rhythms of Marco's life had shifted into a different key. He worked on the Bentley with meticulous care, each repair bringing the elegant machine closer to its former glory, while his mind wrestled with the magnitude of the decision before him. Sofia had thrown herself into research with the enthusiasm only a 16-year-old could muster. Their small apartment was now papered with printouts about European music conservatories, photographs of concert halls in Vienna and Prague, maps marking the locations of famous composers' birthplaces. She'd even found online forums where traveling families shared their experiences with mobile education, and she read him excerpts over dinner each night with barely contained excitement. Listen to this, Papa, she said Tuesday evening, waving a printed article over her plate of reheated pizza. This family traveled for 3 years while their daughter studied violin, and she ended up getting into Juilliard. Juilliard, Papa, can you imagine? Marco could imagine it, and that was part of the problem. The more real Sofia's enthusiasm made Catherine's offer seem, the more his protective instincts rebelled against the idea of uprooting their entire lives for what might turn out to be an elaborate fantasy. Wednesday morning brought Catherine back to the garage, this time carrying her travel journal, a leather-bound book that looked well worn from years of use. She settled onto her customary stool and opened it while Marco performed the final adjustments on the Bentley's fuel system. "I thought you might like to see this," she said, offering him the journal. "It's not much, but it might help you understand what this journey would actually look like." Marco wiped his hands and accepted the journal, surprised by its weight. The pages were filled with Catherine's elegant handwriting, interspersed with ticket stubs, pressed flowers, business cards from hotels and restaurants, and photographs tucked between the pages. Each entry was dated and detailed, chronicling not just places visited, but emotional responses, moments of discovery, instances of unexpected beauty. He read about her night in a small Portuguese village, where she'd stumbled upon a street festival and danced until dawn with strangers who became friends. He learned about the morning she'd spent in a Tuscan garage, watching an elderly man restore a 1930s Alfa Romeo with the same reverence Marco brought to his work. There were entries about loneliness, 2 hotel rooms that felt too large, meals eaten in solitude, the particular ache of experiencing beauty with no one to share it. "You've been traveling alone for almost a year," Marco observed. "Since Robert died, yes." Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, but Marco heard the underlying sadness. "We'd planned to take this trip together after I retired from performing. He was fascinated by automotive history, and I wanted to explore the musical heritage of Europe. When he passed, I thought the dream died with him. But you went anyway. I tried to." Catherine smiled ruefully. "The truth is, I've been going through the motions, checking places off a list without really experiencing them. Everything feels hollow when you have no one to share it with." Marco turned a page and found a photograph of Catherine standing beside a vintage Mercedes in what looked like the Swiss Alps. She was smiling, but there was something forced about it, as if she were performing happiness for the camera rather than feeling it. "That was taken last month," Catherine said, noticing his focus on the image. "I remember thinking how beautiful the setting was, how perfect the light, and feeling absolutely nothing. That's when I realized I was doing this all wrong. What changed?" "You and Sofia changed it," Catherine said simply. "Listening to you, to the other night, seeing the way you care for each other, for the things you work on it, reminded me what I've been missing. Purpose, connection, the sense that what I'm doing matters to someone other than myself." Sofia's voice drifted down from above, where she was practicing scales with unusual intensity. Marco had caught her several times over the past few days playing with her eyes closed, as if she were imagining herself in the concert halls she'd been researching. "She wants this more than she's saying," Marco said quietly. "And you don't want to disappoint her," Catherine observed. "But you're also terrified of making the wrong choice." Marco closed the journal and handed it back to her. "I've spent 3 years building a life that's stable, predictable, safe. Sofia's never wanted for anything essential. She has friends here, a routine, a sense of belonging. How do I risk all of that on the promise of something that might not work out?" Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "When I was Sofia's age, I auditioned for a summer program at the Moscow Conservatory. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant leaving everything familiar behind for 3 months. My parents were terrified the Cold War was still very real, and they were sending their only daughter to a foreign country where they couldn't protect her. Did you go? I did, and it changed my life. Not just musically, but in every way that mattered. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, more adaptable than I'd imagined. I learned that the world was bigger and more welcoming than my fears had made it seem." Catherine paused. "I also learned that some opportunities only come once, and the regret of not taking them can last a lifetime." Marco walked to the bay doors and looked out at the ocean. thinking about the geography of his fears. He'd lived his entire life within a 50-mile radius of this spot, had never needed a passport, had never slept in a bed that wasn't either his childhood home or the apartment above the garage. The idea of taking Sofia away from everything she'd ever known felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. What if she gets homesick? He asked. What if the tutoring doesn't work out, or she falls behind academically, or she decides she doesn't want to be a musician after all? Then we adapt, Catherine said firmly. Marco, there are no guarantees in any choice you make. If you stay here, Sofia might get a perfectly adequate education and live a perfectly safe life. She might also spend the rest of her days wondering what she could have become if she'd had better opportunities. A Bentley's engine turned over smoothly when Marco started it, purring with the satisfied sound of a machine returned to health. He let it run for a few minutes, listening to the precision of its idle, the perfect balance of its restored systems. She's ready, he announced, though he wasn't sure if he was talking about the car or something else entirely. Catherine stood and ran her hand along the Bentley's elegant lines. Thank you. She sounds better than she has in months. Good maintenance makes all the difference, Marco replied, though even the best care can't prevent wear and tear forever. Eventually, everything needs major restoration or replacement. Is that what you think you're facing? Catherine asked gently. The choice between restoration and replacement? Marco considered her words. Maybe. I've been thinking about Elena a lot these past few days, about what she'd want for Sofia. Elena always dreamed bigger than I did, saw possibilities I couldn't imagine. She used to say that love meant being willing to let people grow, even if it meant they outgrew you. Wise woman, she was. Marco touched Elena's ring through his shirt. She also used to say that the worst kind of poverty wasn't lacking money, it was lacking choices. And right now, Sofia doesn't have many choices about her future, not real ones. Sofia appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the sound of the running engine. Is she fixed, Papa? She's fixed, Marco confirmed. Come down and listen to how an engine should sound when everything's working properly. Sofia descended the stairs and approached the Bentley with the same reverence Marco had shown it. She listened to the engine's smooth idle, then looked up at her father with an expression that mixed hope and trepidation. Papa, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll understand, she said quietly. I don't want you to feel pressured because of my dreams. Marco felt his heart crack a little at her maturity, at the way she was trying to protect him from the weight of her own desires. This was Elena's daughter, all right generous and selfless, even when her own future hung in the balance. What are your dreams, Mia? He asked. Really? Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually dream about when you let yourself. Dream big. Sofia glanced at Catherine, then back at her father. I dream about playing in places where music matters, where people understand what I'm trying to say with my hands. I dream about learning from teachers who can show me things I didn't know were possible. I dream about you being proud of me for something bigger than just being a good student or an obedient daughter. I'm already proud of you, Marco said softly. But I understand what you mean. Catherine stepped forward slightly. Marco, what if we started small? What if instead of committing to months of travel, we tried a week? I could hire you to help me drive to San Francisco for a vintage car show next weekend. Sofia could come along, visit some music schools, see how she feels about being away from home. If it doesn't feel right, you drive back and nothing changes. If it does feel right, well, then we talk about longer possibilities. Marco looked at his daughter, seeing Elena's courage in her eyes, Elena's willingness to take risks for the sake of something beautiful. A trial run? Exactly, Catherine said. Low stakes, reversible, but enough to give you both a real sense of what this could be like. Sofia's face lit up with carefully controlled hope. We could visit the San Francisco Conservatory. and the California Academy of Music, and there's a performance of La Boheme at the Opera House this weekend. Marco felt the familiar tug his daughter's enthusiasm, but this time, instead of feeling overwhelmed by possibilities he couldn't provide, he felt something else: anticipation. Maybe Elena had been right about life, rebuilding people into something they didn't know they could become. 1 week, he said finally. A trial run. But Sofia, you have to promise me that if you change your mind at any point, if you want to come home, you'll tell me immediately. No trying to protect my feelings or Catherine's. Deal? Deal, Sofia said, throwing her arms around him. Catherine smiled, the first genuinely joyful expression Marco had seen from her since they'd met. Then I suppose we have some planning to do. As they began discussing logistics, when to leave, what to pack, how to secure the garage, Marco felt the strangest sensation, as if his life were a song that had been playing in a minor key for 3 years and was finally shifting towards something brighter. It wasn't resolution yet, just the promise of it. But after so long in the shadows, even the possibility of light felt like a gift. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made the California coast look like a postcard. Marco stood in Sofia's room, watching her pack for their San Francisco trial run with the methodical precision she'd inherited. From him, each item was considered, folded carefully, and placed in her small suitcase with deliberate intent. I can't decide about the formal dress, Sofia said, holding up a simple black dress they'd bought for her junior year recital. What if there's a chance to attend a real performance? Bring it, Marco advised. Better to have it and not need it than the other way around. Sofia nodded and added the dress to her suitcase, then paused. Papa, are you nervous? Marco considered, lying, offering reassurance he didn't feel. But Sofia deserved honesty. Terrified, he admitted. I haven't been anywhere significant since our honeymoon to Monterey, and that was 18 years ago. I don't know how to be a tourist, or how to navigate a big city, or how to let me grow up. Sofia interrupted gently. Her perception stopped him short. Is that what this is about? Sofia sat on her bed and patted the space beside her, inviting him to join her. I found something the other day, she said quietly, pulling a manila folder from her knitstand drawer. College applications. You'd hidden them, but not very well. Marco's stomach dropped as he recognized the forms. UC Berkeley, UCLA, San Francisco State, all the schools Sofia had researched online, but which they both knew were financially impossible. The applications were partially filled out in Sofia's careful handwriting, then abandoned. When did you? Last month, Sofia said. I thought maybe if I could get scholarships, financial aid, if I worked part-time, but the numbers don't work, do they? Even with aid, we can't afford it. Marco stared at the applications, seeing his daughter's dreams quantified in dollar amounts he couldn't provide. Sofia, I'm sorry. I wanted to give you options, but don't apologize, Papa. You've given me everything that matters. Love, security, a home where I could discover music, the confidence to believe I have something worth sharing. Sofia took his hand. But these applications, they made me realize that wanting something and being able to achieve it aren't the same thing, at least not for people like us. People like us? People who choose love over money, who value taking care of each other more than getting ahead. Sofia smiled sadly. It's not a criticism, Papa. It's who we are, and I'm proud of that. But it also means my dreams have to fit inside our reality. Marco felt a familiar ache in his chest, the weight of all the opportunities he couldn't provide pressing down like a physical force. What if Catherine's offer could change that reality? That's what I've been thinking about. Sofia pulled out another paper, a printout of scholarship requirements for European music conservatories. I've been researching programs that might be possible if I had proper training first. Some of them don't require American undergraduate degrees if you can demonstrate exceptional ability. And Catherine could help you demonstrate that ability. She's offering to, yes. But Papa, I need you to know something. I don't want this opportunity if it means you'll be miserable. If you're only saying yes because you think it's what I need, then I'd rather stay here and find another way. Marco studied his daughter's face, seeing Elena's wisdom in her young features. What if I'm saying yes because I think it's what we both need? What do you mean? Marco stood and walked to Sofia's window, which offered a view of the garage below and the ocean beyond. I've been thinking about the man I was before your mother died, and the man I've become since. I used to have dreams too, you know. I wanted to restore classic cars, maybe open a specialty shop, travel to car shows, and meet other enthusiasts. What happened to those dreams? Life happened. Responsibility, fear, the need to create stability for you. Marco turned back to his daughter. But maybe stability isn't the same thing as safety. Maybe by trying so hard to protect you from uncertainty, I've been limiting both our possibilities. Sofia joined him at the window. So this trip is as much for you as it is for me? Maybe it is. Catherine's cars, they're the kind of machines I've only worked on in magazines. The places she wants to go, I've never imagined being able to see them. Marco paused. Your mother used to say I had a gift for bringing broken things back to life. Maybe it's time I tried bringing my own dreams back to life too. A knock on the front door interrupted their conversation. Marco opened it to find Catherine standing on their doorstep with a young woman he didn't recognize, mid-20s, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, Catherine said. This is Jennifer Martinez. She's an educational consultant who specializes in alternative learning programs for traveling families. Jennifer stepped forward with a warm smile. Mr. De Leon, I understand you're considering an educational arrangement that would allow Sofia to continue her studies while traveling. I'd love to discuss how that might work in practice. Marco invited them in, and Jennifer quickly spread her materials across their small dining table. She explained online curricula, tutoring networks, international testing protocols, and college preparation programs with the easy confidence of someone who'd helped dozens of families navigate similar transitions. The key, Jennifer explained, is maintaining academic rigor while adapting to unconventional circumstances. Sofia would actually have access to resources most traditional. Students never see museums, cultural sites, native language immersion, real-world history, and geography lessons. What about her high school diploma? Marco asked. California allows for flexible completion of requirements through approved programs. Sofia could graduate on schedule, possibly even early, depending on how quickly she progresses. Jennifer turned to Sofia. Have you given thought to what you'd like to study beyond music? Languages, Sofia said immediately. History, literature, cultural studies. I've always been interested in how music reflects the societies that create it. Perfect. European travel would give you first-hand exposure to all of those subjects. Jennifer pulled out a sample schedule. This shows how a typical week might look: morning academics, afternoon cultural activities, evening music practice and instruction. Marco studied the schedule, surprised by its structure and comprehensiveness. This isn't just vacation with some schoolwork thrown in. Absolutely not, Jennifer confirmed. Students in these programs often outperform their traditionally educated peers because they're learning in context, seeing the practical applications of their studies immediately. Catherine had remained quiet during Jennifer's presentation, but now she spoke up. I should mention that I've already contacted several music instructors in the cities we'd potentially visit. There's a former Vienna Philharmonic violinist who teaches privately, a piano professor emeritus from the Prague Conservatory, a composer in residence at the Royal College of Music in London. Sofia's eyes widened. You've already made contact with teachers? Preliminary contact only, Catherine clarified. I wanted to know what would be possible before we got too far into planning. Marco felt the ground shifting beneath his feet again, the way it had when Catherine first made her offer. But this time, instead of vertigo, he felt something like excitement. These weren't fantasies anymore. They were concrete possibilities backed by real research and professional guidance. What would happen if Sofia decided she wanted to come home? Marco asked. Or if the arrangement wasn't working for any reason. Then you come home, Jennifer said simply. I work with families to create exit strategies as well as travel plans. The beauty of this approach is its flexibility. You can adapt to changing circumstances without compromising Sofia's educational progress. After Jennifer left, the three of them sat in the apartment's small living room, surrounded by brochures and schedules and possibilities that had seemed impossible just an hour earlier. It's real, Sofia said wonderingly. It's actually possible. It's possible, Catherine agreed. But Marco, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you, or because I think you need rescuing. I'm offering it because I believe we can help each other become better versions of ourselves. Marco nodded slowly. What happens if we try the week in San Francisco, and it goes well? What's the next step? Then we plan a longer journey, Catherine sighed. Maybe start with a month in Europe, England, France, Austria. See how everyone adjusts, how the educational arrangement works in practice, how the three of us function as a traveling unit. And if it doesn't go well, then we say goodbye as friends, and you'll have given Sofia a week she'll never forget, regardless of what comes next. Sofia reached for both their hands. Whatever happens, I want you both to know that the possibility of this has already changed something inside me. For the first time in my life, I feel like my dreams might actually be achievable. Marco squeezed his daughter's hand, then Catherine's, feeling the circle of connection between them. Then I guess we better start packing seriously. We leave tomorrow. That evening, as Marco made final arrangements for the garage's temporary closure and Sofia practiced piano with unusual intensity, Catherine sat at their kitchen table, writing in her travel journal. When Marco passed by with a load of laundry, he glimpsed a few lines of her elegant handwriting. For the first time in 2 years, I understand what Robert meant when he said that the best journeys aren't about the places you see, but about the people you become along the way. Tomorrow, we begin to discover who we might become together. Marco continued to his bedroom, where Elena's wedding dress still hung in the closet next to his work shirts. He touched the silk fabric gently, then spoke to the empty room. I think you'd like her, Elena. I think you'd approve of what we're about to do. The house settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs, but for the first time in 3 years, the silence felt expectant rather than empty, as if it were holding its breath for the adventure about to begin. The drive to San Francisco in Catherine's Bentley felt like crossing into another world. Marco sat behind the wheel, adjusting to the luxury sedan's precise handling while Catherine navigated from the passenger seat, and Sofia pressed her face to the rear window, watching the familiar coastline give way to rolling hills and then to urban sprawl. Take the next exit, Catherine instructed as they approached the city. The hotel is in Nob Hill, but I thought we might drive through the Marina District first, so Sofia can see the Golden Gate Bridge from this angle. Sofia gasped as the iconic bridge came into view, its towers disappearing into wisps of fog. It's so much bigger than in pictures, she said, pulling out her phone to capture the moment. Marco found himself relaxing into the Bentley's rhythm, appreciating the way the vintage car handled the city's notorious hills with dignified composure. She's got good bones, he murmured, downshifting as they climbed toward their hotel. Robert always said the same thing, Catherine replied with a smile. He bought her in 1985 from an estate sale in Pebble Beach. The previous owner had kept her in pristine condition, but she needed someone who understood her temperament. The Fairmont Hotel rose before them like a palace from another era, its grand facade promising luxuries Marco had only seen in movies. A uniformed valet approached, a Bentley with obvious appreciation, but Marco hesitated before handing over the keys. "She's particular about her idle speed," he told the young man. "And don't rev the engine. She likes to be warmed up gradually." The valet nodded respectfully, recognizing expertise when he heard it. As they gathered their luggage, Sofia whispered to her father, "Papa, this place must cost more per night than we spend on groceries in a month." "Don't worry about the cost," Catherine said gently, overhearing. "This is my investment in our experiment. Besides, I want you both to experience what's possible when we're not constrained by budget considerations." The hotel lobby took Marco's breath away. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. He felt acutely conscious of his worn jeans and work boots among the elegantly dressed guests. But Catherine moved through the space with natural confidence, treating him and Sofia as if they belonged there completely. Their rooms were on the 8th floor, with sweeping views of the bay. Marco stood at his window, watching cable cars climb the steep streets below while processing the surreal nature of his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he'd been worrying about whether he could afford Sofia's school supplies. Now he was staying in one of San Francisco's finest hotels, preparing to visit music conservatories with a woman who spoke casually about traveling the world. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Sofia bounced in, already changed from her travel clothes into the black dress she'd worried about packing. "Catherine says we have dinner reservations at 7, and then tickets to hear the San Francisco Symphony," Sofia announced, her excitement barely contained. "Papa, they're performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Catherine says the soloist is someone she knows from her performing days." Marco looked down at his own clothes, the same jeans and flannel shirt he'd worn for the drive. "I don't think I packed anything appropriate for a symphony." "Catherine thought of that too," Sofia said, pointing to a garment bag hanging on his closet door. "She had the hotel concierge arrange something in your size." Marco unzipped the bag to reveal a navy blazer, dress shirt, and slacks that looked expensive but understated. A note in Catherine's handwriting was pinned to the shirt. "Every man should own at least one outfit that makes him feel confident in any situation. Consider this a practical necessity rather than a gift." See, an hour later, the three of them sat in the hotel's restaurant, sharing what Catherine described as a simple dinner, but which featured ingredients Marco couldn't pronounce and flavors he'd never experienced. Sofia asked intelligent questions about the menu, the wine selection, the restaurant's reputation, absorbing Catherine's explanations with the focused attention she usually reserved for music theory. "You're a natural student," Catherine observed. "Not just of music, but of life. That's rarer than you might think." "I've always been curious about things," Sofia replied. "But we don't have many opportunities for this kind of learning at home." "What kinds of things are you curious about?" Catherine asked. Sofia considered the question while cutting her perfectly prepared salmon, languages mostly. "I've been teaching myself Italian using online videos because I want to understand opera lyrics in their original form. And I'm fascinated by the connection between music and mathematics, how certain ratios and patterns appear in both." Catherine's eyes lit up. "Have you studied the relationship between Fibonacci sequences and musical composition?" "A little," Sofia said eagerly. "I found some articles online, but I couldn't find anyone to discuss them with. Tomorrow, we're visiting the University of California's music department. There's a professor there who's written extensively on mathematical patterns in Bach's compositions. I've arranged for you to sit in on one of his seminars." Marco watched his daughter's face transform with delight and felt something shift inside his chest. Not just pride, but recognition that Sofia's intellectual hunger was deeper than he'd fully understood. She needed more than he could provide, not just financially, but academically, culturally, experientially. The symphony hall was another revelation. Marco had expected something formal and intimidating, but the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with people of all ages who clearly loved music. Catherine guided them to their seat's orchestra, level, close enough to see the musicians' expressions, and provided program notes that helped Marco understand what he was about to hear. When the soloist took the stage, Catherine leaned over and whispered, "Anna Kowalski. We performed together several times in the 90s. She has the most incredible technique, but more importantly, she understands the emotional architecture of Rachmaninoff." The first notes of the concerto filled the hall, and Marco felt something he'd never experienced before, the physical sensation of music washing over him like a wave. Sofia sat transfixed beside him, her hands moving slightly, as if she were playing along on an invisible piano. But it was Catherine's reaction that surprised him most. Tears streamed down her face as she listened, not from sadness, but from what looked like overwhelming joy. During intermission, Catherine excused herself briefly and returned with Anna Kowalski in tow. The pianist was still glowing from her performance, elegant in her concert gown, and she embraced Catherine warmly before being introduced to Marco and Sofia. "Catherine tells me you're a very talented young pianist," Anna said to Sofia in accented English. "Would you be interested in hearing about some summer programs that might interest you?" Sofia nodded eagerly, and Anna pulled out her phone to show videos and photos from music festivals in Austria and Poland, where young musicians studied with masters during intensive residencies. "The applications are competitive," Anna explained, "but Catherine says you have exceptional potential. If you're serious about developing your gifts, these programs could provide the foundation you need." As Anna returned to prepare for the second half of the concert, Sofia turned to her father with shining eyes. "Papa, did you hear what she said? She thinks I could be accepted to programs like that." "I heard," Marco said, though he was still processing the conversation. These weren't distant dreams anymore. They were concrete possibilities with application, deadlines, and audition requirements. The second half of the concert featured pieces Marco didn't recognize, but he found himself swept away by the orchestra's precision, the conductor's passionate gestures, the way music could transform a room full of strangers into a unified emotional experience. When the final notes faded and the audience erupted in applause, he understood why Sofia had always been drawn to this world. Back at the hotel, they gathered in Catherine's suite for what she called a debrief session. The room was elegant, but comfortable, with a sitting area that invited conversation. Catherine had ordered tea and small pastries from room service, creating an atmosphere that encouraged reflection. "How are you processing all of this?" Catherine asked Marco directly. Marco considered his words carefully. "It's overwhelming, but not in a bad way. I feel like I've been watching Sofia through a telescope for years, seeing her from a distance, and tonight I got to use a microscope instead. The detail, the possibility, it's all so much clearer." "And how does that make you feel? Inadequate?" Marco admitted, "but also hopeful. I've known Sofia was talented, but I didn't understand the scope of what that talent could become with proper nurturing." Sofia curled up in an armchair, still wearing her black dress, but with her shoes kicked off. "I keep thinking about what Anna said about foundation. I feel like I've been building a house of music without really understanding architecture." "That's not a criticism of what you've accomplished so far," Catherine said gently. "You've built something beautiful with the materials you had available. But imagine what you could create with access to better tools, more experienced guidance, broader inspiration." "Is that what this trip would really be about?" Marco asked. "Giving Sofia better tools?" "Partly," Catherine agreed. "But it's also about giving you both permission to dream bigger than your circumstances have previously." Aloud, "Marco, I've watched you work on cars, and you have an artist's sensibility. You don't just fix engines, you restore them to their full potential. That's exactly what Sofia needs for her music, and what you might need for your own life." Marco stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights spread below them like stars brought down to earth. What if we're not ready for this? What if the scope of it is too much? Then we scale back, Catherine said simply. But what if you're more ready than you think? What if the only thing holding you back is the assumption that people like you aren't meant for experiences like this? Sofia joined her father at the window. Papa, do you remember what Mama used to say about the ocean? Marco smiled at the memory. She said it was the same water whether you looked at it from the shore or from a boat in the middle of it. The only difference was perspective. Maybe that's what this is, Sofia said softly. A chance to see our lives from a different perspective, to understand that we're part of something bigger than our little town. As they prepared to return to their rooms, Catherine handed Marco a folder. Tomorrow's schedule, she explained. We'll visit the San Francisco Conservatory in the morning, UC's music department in the afternoon, and there's a vintage car show in Golden Gate Park that I thought you might enjoy. Marco opened the folder and found detailed itineraries, contact, information for the people they'd be meeting, and background research on each location. The level of planning and consideration was both impressive and slightly intimidating. You really have thought of everything, he said. I've learned that good preparation makes adventure possible, Catherine replied. But Marco, I want you to know if any of this feels wrong tomorrow, if you want to pack up and drive home, we'll do that. No questions, no pressure, no disappointment. On my part, thank you, Marco said, meaning it. That safety net makes it easier to take the risk. That night, Marco lay in the most comfortable bed he'd ever experienced, listening to the sounds of the city through his 8th-floor window. He thought about Elena, about how she would have loved the symphony, the elegant dinner, the conversations about possibility and potential. He could almost hear her voice encouraging him to be brave, to trust that love was sometimes about letting go rather than holding on. His phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. Papa, I'm too excited to sleep. Is it wrong to hope that tomorrow goes so well we never want to come home? Marco typed back. It's not wrong to hope, Mia. It's human. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Marco's last conscious thought was that tomorrow would determine not just whether they continued this adventure, but whether he was brave enough to let both Sofia and himself become the people they were capable of being. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline light that made San Francisco's Victorian architecture look like something from a fairy tale. Marco woke to find a note slipped under his door from Catherine. Meet in the lobby at 9 a.m. Today, we discover what's possible. See, the San Francisco Conservatory of Music occupied a stunning building that had once been a church. Its Gothic Revival architecture lending an almost sacred atmosphere to the pursuit of musical excellence. As they waited in the reception area, Sofia's hands moved nervously in her lap, practicing invisible scales. Remember, Catherine said gently, this isn't an audition. It's a conversation about possibilities. Dr. Patricia Chun, the admissions director, appeared precisely on time, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She led them through practice rooms where students could be heard working on everything from classical piano to experimental compositions. We have students from 43 countries, Dr. Chun explained as they walked. What unites them isn't nationality or background. It's absolute dedication to their craft and the understanding that music is both deeply personal and universally connective. They paused outside a practice room where a young man was playing what sounded like Chopin with technical precision, but little emotional depth. Dr. Chun knocked gently and entered, introducing Sofia as a visiting prospective student. Play something you love, the professor inside suggested to Sofia. Not something you think we want to hear, but something that means something to you. Sofia sat at the piano and closed her eyes for a moment, then began playing Elena's lullaby, the piece that Catherine had helped complete. But this version was different from what Marco had heard at home. Sofia had added her own interpretations, her own emotional shadings. transforming the simple melody into something complex and deeply moving. The room fell silent when she finished. A professor, a distinguished man with gray hair and gentle hands, nodded slowly. "That was composed by someone who understands loss," he said. "But you've added hope to it. Where did you study composition?" "I didn't," Sofia said quietly. "My father wrote the original melody for my mother before she died. I've been trying to find ways to honor both their memories, her love of music and his gift for creating beautiful things." Dr. Chun and the professor exchanged glances. "Sofia," Dr. Chun said carefully, "would you be interested in playing for our weekend masterclass? We have visiting faculty from several European conservatories, and I think they would be very interested in hearing your interpretation of that piece." Marco felt his breath catch. A week ago, Sofia had been practicing alone in their small apartment. Now she was being invited to perform for international music educators. "I'd be honored," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the opportunity. A master class was held in the conservatory's main recital hall, a beautiful space with perfect acoustics, and an audience of about 30 advanced students and faculty members. Sofia was the youngest performer by several years, but she approached the piano with the poise Catherine had been teaching her Dot as she played Elena's lullaby again. Marco watched the faces of the listeners. He saw recognition, respect, and something that looked like genuine surprise. When Sofia finished, the applause was enthusiastic, but brief, the kind of response that indicated serious consideration rather than mere politeness. Dr. Elizaveta Volkova, a visiting professor from the Moscow Conservatory, stood and approached the piano. She was an imposing woman with steel-gray hair and intense eyes, and when she spoke, her accent added gravity to her words. "This composition, it speaks of Russian influence, but also American folk tradition. You have intuitive understanding of musical storytelling," she said to Sofia. "Where do you hope to study?" "I haven't been able to make concrete plans yet," Sofia replied honestly. "My education has been limited by our circumstances." Dr. Volkova turned to Catherine and Marco. "You are her parents?" "I'm her father," Marco said. "Catherine is." He paused, unsure how to define their relationship. "I'm a friend who believes Sofia's talent deserves proper development," Catherine said smoothly. Dr. Volkova nodded approvingly. "Talent without support is tragedy. Talent with proper guidance becomes gift to world." She handed Sofia a business card. "You have email?" "Yes, ma'am. I send you information about summer intensive in Moscow. Full scholarship available for exceptional students. You would study with masters, perform with orchestra, learn tradition that shaped greatest composers." As they left the conservatory, Sofia clutched Dr. Volkova's card like a treasure. "Papa, did that really happen? Did she really offer me a full scholarship to study in Moscow?" "She offered you the opportunity to apply for one," Marco corrected gently, though his own mind was reeling. "But Sofia, the fact that she saw that potential in you after hearing you play once, that tells us something important about your abilities." Their afternoon visit to UC Berkeley's music department proved equally enlightening. Professor David Kim, the mathematician-musician Catherine had mentioned, welcomed Sofia into his seminar on Fibonacci sequences in Bach's compositions with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely encountered students young enough to still find mathematical patterns. "Genuinely exciting. Most of my graduate students approach this material with resignation," he confided to Marco and Catherine as they observed from the back of the classroom. "Sofia's asking questions that suggest she sees the connections intuitively, not just intellectually." The vintage car show in Golden Gate Park provided a different kind of education for Marco. Catherine introduced him to collectors and restorers from around the world, men and women who spoke about automobiles with the same passion Sofia brought to music. Marco found himself in deep conversation with a German collector who specialized in pre-war Mercedes models. "Your understanding of fuel systems is quite sophisticated. the collector said, after Marco had diagnosed a running problem in the man's 1938 540K. Have you considered expanding into European restoration work? There's significant demand for mechanics who truly understand these machines. I've never had the opportunity to work on cars like this, Marco admitted. Perhaps you should create the opportunity, the collector suggested, handing Marco his business card. I have associates in Munich, Vienna, London, who are always seeking skilled craftsmen. The work pays well, and the machines, they are like nothing you have experienced. That evening, they gathered again in Catherine's suite for dinner and reflection. Room service had provided a meal that managed to be both elegant and comfortable, and Sofia had changed from her formal conservatory attire into jeans and the UC Barclay sweatshirt she'd impulsively bought that afternoon. How do we process a day like today? Catherine asked, pouring wine for herself and Marco, sparkling cider for Sofia. I feel like we've been given a glimpse into a parallel universe, Marco said slowly. One where Sofia's talent is recognized and nurtured, where my skills are valued at a completely different level, where possibilities exist that I never imagined. And how does that feel? Marco considered the question while watching Sofia spread her new business cards and brochures across the coffee table, like tarot cards revealing her future. Exciting and terrifying in equal measure. This morning, Sofia was a talented small-town kid with big dreams. Tonight, she's someone that international educators want to mentor. I keep thinking about what Dr. Volkova said, Sofia interjected, about talent without support being a tragedy. Papa, I don't want my abilities to be a tragedy. They won't be, Marco said firmly. Today proved that. The question is how we move forward from here. Catherine had been unusually quiet during dinner, but now she set down her wine glass and looked at both of them seriously. I need to tell you something. Today wasn't just about showing you possibilities. It was about helping me understand what this journey could really accomplish. What do you mean? Marco asked. When I first made my offer, I thought I was being generous, maybe even a little impulsive. But watching Sofia in those academic settings today, seeing how naturally she connected with serious musicians and scholars, I realized this isn't charity. It's investment in something genuinely extraordinary. Catherine stood and walked to her briefcase, returning with a folder thick with papers. These are preliminary applications and scholarship opportunities for programs in Austria, Germany, England, and Russia. I've been researching them for the past month, but today confirmed that Sofia would be competitive for any of them. Sofia's eyes widened as she flipped through the materials. These are all full scholarships. Some of them even provide living stipends. For the right students, yes, Catherine confirmed. But Sofia, you'd need proper preparation, intensive coaching, performance experience at a high level. That's what our extended journey could provide. Marco felt the familiar vertigo of too many possibilities opening up at once. You're talking about a complete transformation of our lives. I'm talking about letting your lives become what they were always meant to become, Catherine corrected. Marco, the collector you spoke with today, Heinrich Müller, he's one of the most respected restoration experts in Europe. The fact that he saw potential in your work, after a brief conversation, suggests you have abilities that could thrive in an international market. But leaving everything we've built here to build something better somewhere else, Sofia interrupted. Papa, I love our home. I love our life together. But today, I got to see what I could become with the right opportunities. I can't pretend that doesn't matter to me. Marco looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw a young woman on the verge of discovering her full potential. The protective part of him wanted to wrap her in safety and familiarity, but the part that loved her most deeply wanted to give her the chance to soar. What would the next step be? He asked Catherine. Hypothetically. Catherine smiled, recognizing the shift in his tone from resistance to consideration. We extend this trip. Instead of driving home tomorrow, we drive to Oregon wine country for a vintage car rally. Sofia continues her music work with local teachers. You get exposure to more restoration opportunities, and we all adjust to the rhythm of traveling together. For how long? 2 weeks initially. Then, if everyone's comfortable, we plan the European portion of the journey. 3 months to start England, France, Austria, Germany. Sofia could audition for several programs. You could work with restoration experts, and we could all discover whether this lifestyle suits us. Sofia reached for both their hands. I want to try it, she said quietly. Not just the music opportunities, but the adventure of it. The chance to see the world with people I care about. Marco squeezed his daughter's hand, thinking about Elena's words about love meaning the willingness to let people grow. 2 weeks in Oregon, he said finally. We try 2 weeks and see how it feels. Catherine's smile was radiant. 2 weeks it is. As they prepared to return to their rooms, Sofia hugged Catherine tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Not just for the opportunities, but for helping Papa see that it's okay to dream big. Later, alone in his room, Marco called his neighbor, who sometimes helped with the garage, and asked him to extend his coverage for another 2 weeks. Then he sat by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the conversation with Elena's gravestone that had started all of this. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Thank you for trusting me with your daughter's future. I won't take that responsibility lightly, Marco typed back. Thank you for helping me remember that Elena's dreams for Sofia were bigger than my fears. As he prepared for bed, Marco realized that somewhere during the day, his anxiety about the unknown had transformed into anticipation. Tomorrow they would drive north into wine country, continuing an adventure that was reshaping all their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The drive to Portland stretched longer than planned when Catherine suggested a detour through the Columbia River Gorge, where autumn had painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that took Sofia's breath away. They'd spent 2 weeks in Oregon wine country, where Marco had assisted with vintage car maintenance at several vineyard estates, while Sofia worked with a retired Portland Symphony pianist who declared her an extraordinary natural talent in need of sophisticated training. Catherine's modified Mercedes 300 SL had performed flawlessly on the mountain roads, responding to Marco's careful tuning like a thoroughbred eager to run. He'd found himself falling in love with the precision of European engineering, the way these machines demanded both technical skill and intuitive understanding. The hotel is just ahead, Catherine said, consulting her GPS as they descended into Portland's urban core. The Heathman, it's historic, but they have excellent practice facilities that Sofia can use. Sofia had been unusually quiet for the past hour, her excitement about visiting Powell's books and the Oregon Symphony temporarily subdued by what she described as homesickness. Marco understood the feeling. 2 weeks of constant motion and new experiences had been exhilarating but exhausting. The Heathman Hotel rose before them like a brick monument to Pacific Northwest elegance, its facade promising the kind of understated luxury that Marco was slowly learning to appreciate rather than feel intimidated by. As they pulled into the valet area, Marco noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. His blood went cold. Maria Santos Elena's sister stood beside the hotel's revolving door, her dark hair now streaked with premature gray, her face set in the grim expression Marco remembered from Elena's funeral. She wore a business suit that suggested prosperity and purpose, and she was clearly waiting for them. Papa? Sofia's voice carried a note of confusion. Is that Tia Maria? Marco's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken to Elena's sister in over 2 years, not since the bitter argument following Elena's memorial service, when Maria had suggested that Sofia might be better off with relatives who could provide more opportunities. Stay in the car, Marco said quietly. Though his protective instincts were screaming at him to drive away immediately, Catherine sensed the tension without understanding its source. "Marco? What's wrong?" Maria approached the car before Marco could explain, her heels clicking authoritatively on the pavement. She leaned down to the driver's window, and Marco reluctantly lowered it. "Hello, Marco," Maria said, her voice carrying the cool professionalism she'd developed as a family court attorney in Los Angeles. "Sofia, mi amor, you look so grown up." "Tia Maria," Sofia replied uncertainly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you, of course, and to discuss some important matters with your father." Maria's gaze shifted to Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Catherine and Sofia," Marco replied. Though dread was already settling in his stomach like lead, Maria pulled a manila envelope from her briefcase. "I don't think you want to have this conversation in a hotel parking lot, Marco, but if you insist, I'm here because I've filed a petition for custody of Sofia." The words hit Marco like a physical blow. Sofia gasped from the back seat, and Catherine's sharp intake of breath suggested she understood the implications immediately. "On what grounds?" Marco managed to ask, though his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "On the grounds that Sofia deserves better than an itinerant lifestyle with a mechanic who can't provide stable housing, consistent education, or financial security." Maria's tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing a business transaction rather than destroying his family. "Papa provides everything I need," Sofia said fiercely, leaning forward in her seat. "He takes care of me. He loves me. He's not your legal guardian, Sofia," Maria interrupted gently but firmly. "Your mother never completed the adoption paperwork after she married Marco. Legally, you're still Elena Santos's daughter, which makes me your closest blood relative." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marco stared at Maria, processing words that couldn't possibly be true. "That's impossible. I adopted Sofia when she was 6 months old." "Elena and I went to court. You started the process," Maria corrected. "But Elena got pregnant again almost immediately, and when she miscarried, she fell into a depression that lasted months. The adoption was never finalized. I have copies of all the relevant documents." Sofia's voice was small and confused. "Papa, what is she talking about?" Marco's mind raced back 16 years, trying to reconstruct the legal proceedings he'd barely understood at the time. Elena had handled most of the paperwork, had assured him that everything was properly filed, that Sofia was legally his daughter in every way that mattered. But there had been complications, delays, Elena's grief over the miscarriage. "Even if that's true," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the crisis unfolding around them, "Marco has been Sofia's father for 16 years. No court would disrupt that relationship based on a technicality." Maria turned her attention to Catherine with the focused intensity of a predator identifying a threat. "And you are?" "Catherine Whitmore, a friend of the family, the wealthy widow who's been encouraging Marco to abandon his responsibilities and gallivant around the country." Maria's smile was razor-sharp. "Yes, I've done my research, Mrs. Whitmore. I know about your offer to take Sofia traveling, about the music lessons and the fancy hotels. Very generous, but hardly the foundation for a stable childhood. How did you know where to find us?" Marco asked, pieces of an unwelcome puzzle clicking into place. "Sofia's been posting on social media," Maria replied. "Instagram photos from San Francisco, Facebook check-ins from Oregon. It wasn't difficult to track your movements." Sofia looked stricken. "I was just sharing the trip with my friends. You didn't think that posting about luxury hotels and European travel plans might raise questions about your living situation?" Maria's voice carried false sympathy. "Sofia, dear, I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to protect you from a lifestyle that looks exciting but lacks foundation." Marco felt his world crumbling with sickening speed. "What do you want, Maria?" I want what's best for Sofia. My husband and I can provide her with a stable home in Los Angeles, excellent schools, proper music instruction, and college preparation, without requiring her to live out of suitcases or depend on the charity of strangers. Catherine isn't a stranger, Sofia said hotly. She's been kinder to us than you've ever been. And this isn't charity, it's opportunity. Maria's expression softened slightly. I understand that this seems exciting, Sofia, but what happens when Mrs. Whitmore gets tired of playing benefactor? What happens when your father's romantic infatuation ends and you're left stranded in a foreign country with no legal protections? The insinuation about romantic involvement hit Marco like a slap. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Maria's smile was knowing. A wealthy widow, a struggling mechanic, a convenient excuse to travel the world together. It's quite a romantic story. But what about Sofia's needs? What about stability, education, planning for her future? Catherine stepped forward, her voice calm but steel-edged. I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Sofia doesn't need to hear adults arguing about her future in a hotel parking lot. Agreed, Maria said. There's a conference room we can use in the hotel. Sofia, why don't you wait in the lobby while the adults discuss the legal realities of your situation? No, Sofia said firmly. If you're talking about my future, I want to be part of the conversation. Marco looked at his daughter, the girl he'd raised, protected, and loved as his own for 16 years, and saw Elling's strength in her young face. Sofia's right. She should be part of this discussion. The hotel's business center was sterile, and impersonal fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows as they gathered around a conference table. Maria spread legal documents across the polished surface, like weapons being prepared for battle. The facts are simple, Maria began, adopting the tone Marco remembered from family arguments years ago. Marco has no legal standing as Sofia's guardian. I am her closest blood relative. I can provide superior educational opportunities, financial stability, and a permanent home. And what I can provide doesn't matter? Marco asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Love matters, of course, but love doesn't pay for college tuition or provide health insurance or ensure Sofia's future security. Maria turned to Sofia. Sweetheart, I know this is difficult to hear, but Marco has been struggling financially for years. Your medical expenses alone could bankrupt him if you had a serious illness. Sofia's voice was quiet but firm. Papa has never let me want for anything important. Because he sacrificed his own needs for yours, Maria replied. That's admirable, but it's not sustainable. What happens when he gets older and can't work as hard? What happens if this garage fails completely? You'll be starting your adult life with nothing, no college fund, no safety net, no family resources to fall back on. Marco felt each word like a physical blow because there was truth in them. He had been struggling financially, had been unable to provide Sofia with opportunities that money could buy, had been essentially living paycheck to paycheck for years. But that's changing, Catherine interjected. Marco has skills that are in high demand internationally. Sofia has talent that could earn her scholarships to the finest conservatories. They're not running away from problems. They're moving toward solutions. Maria's laugh was bitter. With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, you've known them for what, a month? I've watched Marco struggle to provide for Sofia for 16 years. This sudden transformation into jet-setting opportunities is lovely. But it's not realistic long-term. You don't know what you're talking about, Sofia said, anger creeping into her voice. Papa isn't struggling anymore. He's discovering what he's capable of when he believes in himself. Sofia, you're 16, Maria said gently. You don't understand the legal and financial complexities of adult life. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you from decisions that could limit your future. Marco stared at the custody petition, the legal language blurring as he tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. How long have you been planning this? Since I saw Sofia's social media posts about traveling to Europe, Maria admitted. I realized that Marco was making decisions about your future without considering the legal ramifications. Someone needed to intervene. By taking me away from the only father I've ever known? Sofia's voice rose. Tia Maria, I barely remember you visiting when Mama was alive. You missed my birthday parties, my school concerts, my graduation from middle school. Now you want to be my guardian? Maria's composed facade cracked slightly. I stayed away because it was too painful to see Elena's daughter being raised by someone else. But I never stopped caring about you, Sofia. I never stopped feeling responsible for you. Responsible? Marco's anger finally broke through his shock. Where was that responsibility when Elena was dying and we needed help with medical bills? Where was it when Sofia was grieving and needed family support? You show up now, when things are finally getting better, and claim you're protecting her? I'm claiming my legal rights as her family, Maria shot back. Rights that exist whether you acknowledge them or not. The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and Sofia's barely controlled breathing. Catherine was the first to speak, her voice carefully measured. Maria, what exactly are you proposing? Full custody transfer to me and my husband. Sofia would live with us in Los Angeles, attend excellent schools, receive proper music instruction, and have the stability she deserves. Maria's tone became more conciliatory. Marco could have visitation rights, of course. We're not trying to eliminate him from Sofia's life entirely. Visitation rights? Sofia's voice cracked. He's my father. Legally, he's not, Maria said with practiced gentleness. I know that's hard to accept, but we have to deal with reality. Marco felt something breaking inside him, not just his heart, but his understanding of everything he'd built his life around. You can't just take her. Courts don't separate loving families based on technicalities. Courts prioritize the best interests of the child, Maria corrected. A stable home, educational opportunities, financial security. These aren't technicalities, Marco. They're fundamental needs. Catherine leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. What's your timeline for this legal action? The petition has been filed. There will be a hearing within 30 days to determine temporary custody arrangements. Pending a full investigation. Maria's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine concern. Marco, I'm not doing this to hurt you. But I watched Elena worry about Sofia's future, watched her fear that she wasn't doing enough to prepare her daughter for the world. I promised Elena I'd watch out for Sofia if anything happened to her. You promised Elena? Marco's voice was hollow. When? The night before she died, Maria said quietly. She was terrified that Sofia would be limited by circumstances, that her talent would be wasted. She made me swear that if I ever had the opportunity to give Sofia better chances, I would take it. The revelation hit Marco like a physical blow. Elena's final worries, her last conversation with her sister, he'd never known about any of it. The morphine had made Elena's last days confused and fragmented, and she'd been too weak to speak coherently with him about the future. Sofia was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked between the adults who were deciding her. Fate, this is insane. Papa loves me. I love him. We're happy together. Why are you trying to destroy that? Because love isn't enough, Maria said, reaching across the table toward Sofia's hand. Your mother loved you desperately, but she also wanted you to have every possible advantage in life. I can provide those advantages. Sofia jerked her hand away. You can provide money. That's not the same thing. Sofia, you're talented enough to attend Juilliard, to perform with major orchestras, to have an international career. But you need proper preparation, connections, opportunities that Marco simply cannot provide on his own. Maria gestured toward Catherine. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore has offered to help, but what happens when that arrangement ends? You'll be back where you started, except you'll have lost years of proper educational foundation. Marco stared at the custody documents, his mind reeling with the implications. How did you find out about the adoption not being finalized? Alina's estate papers, Maria admitted. When I was helping settle her affairs, I discovered that several legal matters had been left incomplete. The adoption was one of them. And you waited 3 years to act on that information? I waited until I saw that you were making decisions that could harm Sofia's future. Maria's voice hardened slightly. Taking a 16-year-old out of school to travel around Europe with strangers isn't responsible parenting. Marco, it's escapism. It's giving her opportunities you could never provide, Catherine said firmly. Sofia has been accepted to master classes at some of the finest conservatories in Europe. She's being mentored by world-class musicians. How is that harmful to her? Future? Because it's temporary and unstable, Maria replied. What happens when Sofia wants to come home, but can't because she has no legal status abroad? What happens if Marco gets sick or injured in a foreign country? What happens if you decide you're tired of subsidizing their adventures? The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting vulnerabilities that Marco had tried not to think about. He looked at Sofia, seeing fear and confusion in her young face, and felt the weight of every decision he'd made over. The past month, I need to call my lawyer, he said finally. You should, Maria agreed. But Marco, you should also think carefully about what's really best for Sofia. My husband and I can give her everything: stability, education, opportunities, and family. We're not asking you to disappear from our life, just to let us provide the foundation she needs. Sofia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't listen to this anymore. You're talking about me like I'm property to be transferred instead of a person with feelings and choices. Sofia, Maria began. No, Sofia said firmly. I'm 16, not 6. I have opinions about my own life, and my opinion is that I want to stay with Papa. I want to continue our journey with Catherine. I want to take the opportunities we've worked so hard to create. She turned to Marco with desperate eyes. Papa, please don't let her take me away from you. Please fight for us. Marco stood and pulled Sofia into his arms, feeling her trembling against him. Over her head, he met Catherine's eyes and saw determination there, but also worry. This conversation is over for today, he said to Maria. I need time to process what you've told me and to seek legal counsel. Maria nodded and began gathering her documents. Marco, I hope you'll consider what's really best for Sofia rather than what's easiest for you. This doesn't have to be adversarial. You made it adversarial the moment you filed custody papers without talking to me first. Marco replied as Maria prepared to leave. She turned back to Sofia one more time. Mia, I know this is hard to understand right now, but someday you'll realize that I'm trying to protect your future. I love you, and I love your mother. Everything I'm doing is in honor of her memory. After Maria left, the three of them sat in stunned silence in the sterile conference room. Sofia had stopped crying, but was staring at the table with a legal. Documents had been spread like evidence of her uncertain future. Papa, she said quietly, is it true? Are you not really my legal father? Marco felt his throat close with emotion. I don't know, Mia. Your mother handled all the paperwork, and I trusted that everything was properly filed. If there was a problem, she never told me about it. But it doesn't matter, Sofia said fiercely. You are my father. You're the one who raised me, who took care of me when I was sick, who taught me to drive, who sat through every school concert and recital. DNA and paperwork don't change that. Catherine reached across the table and took both their hands. We're going to fight this, she said firmly. Whatever it takes, we're going to fight this. With what? Marco asked bitterly. Maria's right about one thing. I don't have the resources for a prolonged legal battle. She's a lawyer married to a judge. I'm a small-town mechanic with no legal standing. You have me, Catherine said simply. You have my resources, my connections, my absolute commitment to keeping this family together. Marco looked at Catherine, seeing something in her. Eyes that went beyond friendship or romantic interest. Why? Why would you put yourself through this for us? Because, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion, for the first time in 2 years, I've remembered what it feels like to be part of a family. Because watching you and Sofia together has shown me what love looks like when it's real and selfless and deep. Because the thought of losing that, of letting bureaucracy and legal technicalities destroy something so beautiful, is unbearable. Sofia squeezed both their hands. So what do we do? Marco stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline, while his mind raced through possibilities and obstacles. First, we get a lawyer. Then we figure out exactly what our legal position is. Then we fight with everything we have. And if we lose? Sofia asked quietly. Marco turned back to his daughter, seeing Elena's strength in her young face, but also her vulnerability. We won't lose, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. We can't lose. You're my daughter, Sofia. That's not something a court can change with paperwork. But even as he spoke the words, Marco felt the cold reality of Maria's threat settling around them like fog. For the first time since Elena's death, he was facing the possibility of losing the person who mattered most to him in the world. And this time, love and determination might not be enough to protect what they'd built together, the dream of traveling Europe, of Sofia's musical education, of his own professional growth. All of it seemed suddenly fragile in the face of legal documents and custody hearings. But as he looked at Sofia and Catherine, Marco knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Even if the world was determined to tear them apart, they would go down fighting as a family. The law office of Patricia Kim and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming Portland high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Willamette River that Marco couldn't appreciate given the circumstances. He sat in an uncomfortable chair beside Catherine and Sofia, watching Patricia Kim review the stack of documents. Maria had served them with the previous evening. Patricia was a woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a reputation for handling complex family law cases. Catherine had found her through a network of professional contacts, and her initial consultation had been both enlightening and devastating. The legal situation is complicated, Patricia said, setting down Maria's custody petition. Your sister-in-law is technically correct about the adoption never being finalized, which means Sofia is legally considered Elena Santos's daughter rather than Sofia de Leon. Sofia gripped Marco's hand tighter. They'd spent a sleepless night processing the reality of their situation, and hearing it confirmed by legal counsel felt like another blow. But I've been raising her for 16 years, Marco protested. Surely that counts for something? It absolutely does, Patricia assured him. Washington state recognizes the concept of psychological parent, someone who has functioned as a child's primary caregiver despite lacking formal legal status. However, it's not automatically preferred over biological family connections. Catherine leaned forward. What would strengthen Marco's position? Patricia consulted her notes. Stability, community support, evidence of Sofia's well-being under Marco's care, and Sofia's own preferences, though at 16. Her voice carries significant weight, but isn't determinative. And what strengthens Maria's position? Marco asked, though he dreaded the answer. Financial resources, legal family connection, ability to provide educational opportunities, and, Patricia paused delicately, concerns about your current lifestyle choices. You mean the travel, Sofia said flatly. Among other things, yes. Maria's attorney is arguing that taking Sofia out of traditional school for extended international travel demonstrates poor judgment and instability. Marco felt his world narrowing to this sterile conference room, and the legal documents that threatened to tear his family apart. So pursuing opportunities for Sofia's musical education is being used against me? It's being framed as irresponsible, wandering rather than educational opportunity, Patricia clarified. We need to reframe that narrative, Catherine spoke up. What if we could demonstrate that the travel serves Sofia's educational and career development? I have documentation of the musical opportunities she's been offered, letters from conservatory professors. That would help, Patricia agreed. But we also need to address the underlying question of stability and long-term planning. Over the next 3 hours, Patricia walked them through the legal process they were facing. Emergency custody hearings, child welfare investigations, character, witnesses, financial disclosures, the machinery of family court that would determine Sofia's future with bureaucratic efficiency. How long do we have? Marco asked. The emergency hearing is in 5 days. That will determine temporary custody arrangements while the full investigation proceeds. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Marco, I need to be honest. With you, Maria has significant advantages in this case. Financial stability, traditional family structure, established community ties. We need to build a compelling counter-narrative quickly. As they left the law office, Sofia was unusually quiet. They drove through Portland's downtown in Catherine's Mercedes, the autumn afternoon casting long shadows that seemed to mirror Marco's darkening mood. Papa, Sofia said finally, what if we just left? What if we drove to Canada or Europe or somewhere Maria can't reach us? That would make everything worse, Marco replied, though the thought had crossed his mind. Running would prove her point about instability, and it would make me look like I'm kidnapping you. But you're not kidnapping me. I want to be with you. Catherine pulled into the parking lot of a small waterfront park and turned off the engine. We need to talk about strategy, she said. Not just legal strategy, but emotional strategy. This process is going to be difficult for all of us. They walked to a bench overlooking the river, where families with children were feeding ducks and couples strolled hand in hand along the walking path. The scene was peaceful, normal, everything Marco's life no longer felt. I keep thinking about what Elena would want, Marco said. Maria claims Elena asked her to watch out for Sofia, but Elena also chose me to be Sofia's father. She trusted me with her daughter's future. Then we need to prove that trust was well placed, Catherine said firmly. Patricia mentioned community. Support. Who would testify for you back home? Marco considered the question. Dr. Rodriguez, Sofia's pediatrician, Mrs. Chun from the school district. She's known Sofia since kindergarten. Jim from the diner who's watched Sofia grow up. Tom who runs the auto parts store and has seen how I manage the business. What about Sofia's teachers? Ms. Martinez, my music teacher, Sofia added. She's always said I have potential. And Mr. Thompson from Advanced English. He's been encouraging me to apply for academic scholarships. Catherine made notes on her phone. We need all of them to write letters detailing your relationship, Sofia's well-being, Marco's character as a parent. What about the financial concerns? Marco asked. Maria's right that I've been struggling. But that's changing, Catherine pointed out. You have job opportunities now, prospects for better income. Heinrich Muller sent you that email about restoration work in Munich. Dr. Volkova offered Sofia scholarship opportunities. We're not talking about poverty anymore. We're talking about transition to better circumstances. Sofia stood and walked to the river's edge, watching the water flow toward the ocean. When she turned back, her expression was determined rather and defeated. I want to testify, she said. If this goes to court, I want to tell the judge myself that Papa is my real father and that I choose to stay with him. Sofia, Marco began. No, Papa, I'm 16. I'm old enough to have a voice in this. Sofia's chin lifted with Elena's stubborn courage. I won't let them take me away from you without a fight. That evening, they returned to their hotel to find an envelope that had been slipped under Marco's door. Inside was a handwritten letter from Maria, her flowing script elegant despite the harsh content. Marco, the letter began, I know yesterday was difficult for all of us. I want you to understand that I take no pleasure in this legal action. I'm pursuing custody because I genuinely believe it's best for Sofia, not because I want to hurt you. I've been researching your European travel plans, and I'm concerned about the practical realities. Sofia would be out of traditional school for months, living in foreign countries where you have no legal standing as her guardian, dependent on the continued goodwill of someone you've known for less than 2 months. What happens if Sofia gets seriously ill abroad? What happens if Catherine decides this arrangement isn't working? What happens if you can't find steady employment and run out of money in a foreign country? I can offer Sofia something you cannot: security, stability, and genuine family connections. My husband and I have been trying to have children for 8 years without success. We would love Sofia as if she were our own daughter, and we can provide her with opportunities you cannot. Please consider what's truly best for Sofia rather than what feels best for you. I'm willing to discuss visitation arrangements and to ensure that you remain part of her life, but I cannot stand by and watch Alana's daughter's future be compromised by romantic notions of adventure that ignore practical realities. The court date is Monday. It's not too late to reach a reasonable agreement that serves Sofia's best interests. Maria. Marco read the letter twice, feeling each word like a carefully placed cut. The worst part was that some of Maria's concerns were legitimate. He was proposing to take Sofia away from everything familiar based on opportunities that weren't guaranteed, supported by a woman he'd known for only a month. What does it say? Sofia asked. Marco handed her the letter, watching her face harden as she read. When she finished, she crumpled the paper in her fist. She's trying to make you doubt yourself, Sofia said angrily. She's trying to make our dreams sound foolish and irresponsible. Maybe they are, Marco said quietly. Don't you dare, Catherine said sharply, surprising them both with her vehemence. Don't you dare let her manipulation work. Maria is presenting worst-case scenarios while ignoring all the positive possibilities. But what if she's right? Marco asked. What if I am being selfish, chasing adventures instead of providing stability? Sofia sat beside her father and took his hands. Papa, do you remember what you told me after Mama died? When I was afraid of everything changing? Marco nodded, remembering those first terrible months when grief had made everything feel uncertain and dangerous. You said that sometimes the only way to honor someone's memory is to be brave enough to keep growing, to keep becoming the person they believed you could be. Sofia's voice was steady despite her tears. Mama believed you were the right father for me. She believed I had gifts worth developing. Maria is asking you to betray both of those beliefs. Catherine stood and paced to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. I need to tell you both something, she said without turning around. When Robert died, his family tried to contest his will. They claimed I was a gold digger who had manipulated an elderly man. They suggested that a woman like me, someone without children, without traditional family connections, couldn't be trusted with Robert's legacy. She turned back to face them. The legal battle lasted 8 months. It was brutal, expensive, and emotionally devastating. But I learned something important. Sometimes fighting for what you love requires more courage than walking away. And you won? Sofia asked. I won in court, yes. But more importantly, I won the right to honor Robert's actual wishes rather than what his family thought his wishes should have been. Catherine's voice grew stronger. Marco, Elena chose you to be Sofia's father. She chose you over her own family, over conventional expectations, over financial considerations. Honoring that choice isn't selfish, it's sacred. Marco stood and pulled both women into his arms, feeling their combined strength flow into him. "Then we fight," he said. "We fight with everything we have." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Character witness letters arrived by email, and overnight delivery heartfelt testimonials from teachers, neighbors, family friends, and community members who had watched Marco raise Sofia with love and dedication. Patricia compiled financial records showing Marco's improving situation and his prospects for European employment. Catherine provided documentation of Sofia's musical opportunities and the educational value of their planned travels. Most importantly, they discovered Elena's hidden letters, a shoebox full of correspondence that Sofia found while packing her things for the uncertain future ahead. Among Elena's papers were drafts of the adoption documents she'd been working on before her death, along with handwritten notes expressing her absolute confidence in Marco as Sofia's father. "Look at this," Sofia said, holding up a letter in Elena's familiar handwriting. "It's addressed to Sofia for when she turns 18. With trembling hands, Marco read Elena's words. "My dearest Sofia, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, but you are becoming the woman I always knew you would. I want you to know that choosing Marco as your father was the best decision I ever made. He will love you unconditionally, support your dreams, and protect you with his life. Trust him, follow his guidance, and remember that family is created by love, not biology. Your papa is proof that the best fathers are made, not born." The letter continued with Elena's hopes for Sofia's future, her confidence in Marco's parenting, and her explicit wishes for Sofia to pursue her musical talents, wherever they might lead. "This changes everything," Patricia said when they showed her Elena's letters. "These demonstrate Elena's clear intentions regarding Sofia's custody and future. They directly contradict Maria's claims about Elena's supposed concerns." As Monday's hearing approached, Marco felt the strange calm that comes after accepting that some battles must be fought regardless of the odds. He had Elena's letters, Sofia's fierce loyalty, Catherine's unwavering support, and the testimony of a community that had watched him parent with dedication and love. Sunday evening, as they prepared for what might be their last night together as a family, Sofia played Elena's lullaby on the hotel's piano, but this time she played it with the confidence Catherine had taught her. The technical skills she developed through their travels, and the emotional depth that came from understanding what she was fighting to preserve as the final notes faded. Marco knew that whatever happened in court tomorrow, they had already won something important, the knowledge that love, when it's real and deep and true, creates bonds stronger than any legal document. The Multnomah County Courthouse rose from downtown Portland like a monument to justice, its classical columns and marble steps promising impartiality that Marco desperately hoped would favor truth over technicality. He adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to Elena's funeral, and checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. "Breathe, Papa," Sofia said, taking his arm as they climbed the courthouse steps. She wore her black dress, the same one she'd packed for their San Francisco adventure that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "We have everything we need." Catherine walked beside them, carrying a leather portfolio thick with documentation. Elena's letters, character references, educational opportunities, financial projections. She'd hired the best family law attorney in Portland and had flown in an expert witness on alternative education who would testify about the academic validity of their travel plans. "Remember," Patricia Kim said as they paused outside the courtroom, "this is just a temporary custody hearing. The judge is determining where Sofia should live while the full investigation proceeds. Stay calm, answer honestly, and trust that the truth will prevail." The courtroom was smaller than Marco had expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic spaces he'd seen in movies. Judge Elizabeth Warren, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and graying hair, presided from behind a modest bench. Maria sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit who exuded confidence. "This is a temporary custody hearing in the matter of Santos versus De Leon," Judge Warren announced. "We're here to determine appropriate placement for Sofia Santos, age 16, pending a full custody investigation." Marco's stomach clenched at hearing Sofia referred to by Elena's maiden name, as if the 16 years of father-daughter bond they'd shared could be erased by legal terminology. Maria's attorney, David Reynolds, spoke first with the polished delivery of someone accustomed to winning difficult cases. "Your Honor, this case involves a minor child who has been living with a non-relative for 16 years under the mistaken belief that a legal adoption had been completed. Recent evidence shows that Sofia Santos's closest blood relative, her Aunt Maria Santos Chun, seeks custody to provide stability and opportunities that the current arrangement cannot offer." Reynolds painted Marco as a well-meaning but inadequate guardian whose recent decision to take Sofia traveling represented dangerous instability. He presented financial records showing Marco's struggles, questioned the appropriateness of accepting charity from a recently met widow, and characterized their European plans as escapist fantasy that ignored Sofia's educational needs. The petitioner, Mrs. Santos Chun, is a successful attorney married to a superior court judge. They can provide Sofia with a stable home, excellent education, and genuine family connections. This isn't about questioning Mr. De Leon's affection. For Sofia, it's about ensuring her future isn't compromised by romantic notions that prioritize adventure over responsibility. Patricia Kim stood to present Marco's defense with quiet intensity. "Your Honor, this case is about whether biological connection trumps 16 years of loving, dedicated parenting. Marco De Leon has been Sofia's father in every meaningful sense. Since she was 6 months old, he has raised her through childhood illness, celebrated her achievements, supported her dreams, and provided her with a foundation of love and security that has enabled her to flourish." Patricia presented Elena's letters with careful ceremony, reading excerpts that demonstrated Elena's explicit trust in Marco as Sofia's father and her wishes for Sofia's future. The impact was immediate. Judge Warren leaned forward with obvious interest, and even Reynolds looked concerned. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the opportunities Sofia is being offered through travel aren't escapist fantasy. They're concrete educational and career development prospects that could determine her entire future. We have documentation of scholarship offers from European conservatories, mentorship opportunities with world-class musicians, and a comprehensive educational plan that meets all state requirements." When Sofia was called to testify, she approached the witness stand with Elena's courage visible in every step. Judge Warren spoke to her gently, explaining that she could express her preferences, but that the court would ultimately decide what was in her best interests. "Sofia, can you tell me about your relationship with Mr. De Leon?" Judge Warren asked. "Marco is my father," Sofia said simply. "Not because of paperwork, but because he's the one who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia, who drove me to every piano lesson and school event for 16 years. He's the one who encouraged my music, even when we couldn't afford proper instruction." "And how do you feel about your aunt's petition for custody?" Sofia's voice remained steady, despite the emotion underlying her words. "I understand that Maria thinks she's helping me, but she's wrong. Papa has given me everything I need to become the person I'm meant to be. The opportunities we're pursuing together, the music education, the travel, the chance to audition for European conservatories, these aren't distractions from my future. They are my future. What about the concerns regarding stability and traditional education?" "Your Honor, I've maintained a 4.0 GPA while adapting to online learning during our travels. I've received mentorship from professional musicians that would be impossible in a traditional classroom. I've learned more about history, culture, and languages in the past month than in years of conventional schooling." Sofia paused, choosing her words carefully. Stability isn't about staying in the same place. It's about having people who love you unconditionally and support your growth. Reynolds cross-examined Sofia with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism. Sofia, you're 16 years old. Don't you think adults might have a better perspective on what's truly best for your long-term future? I think adults who know me and love me have the best perspective, Sofia replied. Adults who have watched me grow and understand my dreams and capabilities. But what about financial security, college planning, the practical realities of adult life? Papa has taught me that financial security comes from developing your abilities and working hard, not from depending on other people's money. As for college, the opportunities I'm being offered could lead to scholarships at the finest conservatories in the world. When Marco took the stand, his hands shook slightly as he placed them on the Bible. He'd never felt more conscious of his working class background than in this formal setting, but Patricia's earlier coaching reminded him to speak from the heart. Mr. de Leon, Patricia began, can you tell the court about your relationship with Sofia? Sofia is my daughter, Marco said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've loved her and raised her since she was 6 months old. I've been the one to teach her values, to comfort her fears, to celebrate her achievements. Every major decision in my life for the past 16 years has been made with Sofia's best interests in mind. And the recent travel opportunities, how do you view those? As the chance to finally give Sofia the education and opportunities she deserves. For years, I've had to tell her no to music camps, no to private lessons, no to academic programs we couldn't afford. When Catherine offered us the chance to change that, to give Sofia access to world-class instruction and cultural experiences, I couldn't say no anymore. Reynolds's cross-examination was more aggressive. Mr. de Leon, isn't it true that you've struggled financially for years? That you've been unable to provide Sofia with opportunities that more affluent families take for granted? Yes, Marco admitted, but I've provided her with love, stability, and values. I've taught her that worth isn't measured by money. But wouldn't Sofia be better served by guardians who can provide both love and financial resources? Marco felt the trap in the question, but answered honestly. Sofia deserves every advantage in life, but she also deserves to stay with the father who has raised her, who knows her dreams and fears, who loves her unconditionally. Mr. de Leon, you've known Mrs. Whitmore for less than 2 months. Isn't it irresponsible to uproot Sofia's entire life based on such a brief acquaintance? Marco glanced at Catherine, seeing encouragement in her eyes. I've learned more about possibility and hope in the past month than in the 3 years since my wife died. Catherine hasn't just offered us opportunities. She's reminded us that Sofia's dreams are achievable if we're brave enough to pursue them. The courtroom fell silent as Reynolds prepared his closing argument, but Judge Warren held up her hand. Before we proceed, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Whitmore. While she's not a party to this custody dispute, her role in the proposed arrangements makes her perspective relevant. Catherine approached the witness stand with the poise of someone accustomed to performing under pressure. Her testimony was measured but passionate, explaining her own motivations and her commitment to Sofia's education and Marco's parenting rights. Mrs. Whitmore, Reynolds asked during cross-examination, what happens if you tire of this arrangement? What happens if your romantic relationship with Mr. de Leon ends? Where does that leave Sofia? Catherine's response was immediate and firm. My commitment to Sofia's education and to preserving her family bonds isn't conditional on any relationship with Marco. If circumstances changed, I would ensure Sofia and Marco had the resources to continue their lives together. As testimony concluded, Judge Warren announced that she would review all evidence and render her decision within 24 hours. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving Marco, Sofia, and Catherine to face an uncertain evening, while Maria and her legal team projected confidence about their prospects. Outside the courthouse, Sofia took both adults' hands. Whatever happens, tomorrow, I want you both to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life since Mama died. We're already a family, no matter what any judge decides. Marco looked at his daughter, regardless of what any legal document might say, and realized that Sofia was right. They had already won the most important victory. The question now was whether the law would recognize what love had already established. Tuesday morning arrived with a kind of gray Portland drizzle that matched Marco's mood as they returned to the courthouse for Judge Warren's decision. He'd barely slept, alternating between confidence in their case and terror about losing Sofia. Catherine had ordered room service breakfast, but none of them had eaten much, the weight of anticipation making food seem impossible. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elizabeth Warren, the bailiff announced as they took their seats in the same courtroom where their future had been debated the day before. Judge Warren entered with the measured pace of someone carrying weighty decisions, her expression giving no hint of her conclusions. She settled behind the bench and arranged her papers with deliberate care before looking up at the assembled families whose lives hung in the balance. This has been one of the more complex custody determinations I've faced in my 15 years on the bench, Judge Warren began. The law requires me to consider the best interests of the child while weighing multiple factors including family connections, stability, financial resources, and the child's own expressed preferences. Marco felt Sofia's hand slip into his, her grip tight with nervous energy. Across the aisle, Maria sat rigidly upright, her lawyer's confidence from yesterday replaced by obvious tension. I've spent considerable time reviewing the evidence presented by both parties, the judge continued. The documentation of Sofia's academic achievement, her musical development, the character references supporting Mr. de Leon's parenting, and most significantly, the letters from Sofia's deceased mother expressing her clear intentions regarding Sofia's custody and future. Judge Warren paused, consulting her notes. While Mrs. Santos-Chan is indeed Sofia's closest blood relative and can undoubtedly provide financial advantages, the question before this court is whether disrupting a 16-year parent-child relationship is justified by those advantages. Marco's heart hammered as he tried to read the judge's tone, searching for clues about which way her decision was leaning. Elena Santos's letters are particularly compelling evidence, Judge Warren said, looking directly at Marco. Her explicit trust in Mr. de Leon as Sofia's father, her stated wishes for Sofia's musical education, and her clear intention to complete the adoption process that was interrupted by her illness and death. The judge turned to Sofia. I was also impressed by Sofia's maturity and articulate expression of her preferences. At 16, her voice carries significant weight in custody determinations, particularly when she demonstrates such clear understanding of her own needs and circumstances. Marco felt a flicker of hope, but Judge Warren's expression remained neutral as she continued. However, I also cannot ignore the legitimate concerns raised about stability and long-term planning. Taking a minor child to live abroad for extended periods, while educationally enriching, does present practical and legal complications that must be addressed. Marco's hope wavered. This was starting to sound like a compromise that would satisfy no one and help Sofia least of all. After careful consideration of all factors, Judge Warren said, her voice gaining authority, I am ruling that temporary custody will remain with Marco de Leon, with the following conditions. Relief flooded through Marco so powerfully that he nearly missed the judge's next words. Sofia squeezed his hand so hard, he thought she might break bones, but he didn't care. First, Mr. de Leon must immediately begin proceedings to legally adopt Sofia, completing the process that should have been finalized 16 years ago. The court will expedite this adoption, given the unique circumstances. Second, any extended international travel must be approved by this court in advance, with detailed educational plans, emergency protocols, and legal guardianship arrangements clearly established. Third, Mrs. Santos-Chun will be granted regular visitation rights and will be kept informed of Sofia's educational progress and well-being. Judge Warren looked sternly at both sides. This family has been through enough disruption. It's time to focus on Sofia's future rather than relitigating the past. Maria's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, we respectfully request clarification on the international travel restrictions. The restrictions are simple, Mr. Reynolds. Judge Warren interrupted. Mr. de Leon and Sofia must present comprehensive plans to this court for any travel exceeding 30 days. If those plans demonstrate educational value and appropriate safeguards, they will be approved. If they appear to be poorly planned adventures, they will not. She turned to Patricia Kim. Ms. Kim, please prepare the necessary adoption paperwork. Immediately. I want this family's legal status clarified within 60 days. As the hearing concluded and people began filing out of the courtroom, Marco sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. They had won not completely, not without conditions, but they had won the right to remain. A family. Sofia threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Papa, we did it. We actually did it. Catherine approached more cautiously, her own eyes bright with tears. Congratulations, she said softly. Both of you. Maria lingered near her table as her attorney gathered papers, and after a moment of hesitation, she approached Marco's group. Her composure was shaken, but her voice was steady. Marco, she said quietly, I want you to know that I wasn't trying to hurt Sofia or you. I genuinely believed. I know, Marco interrupted, surprising himself with his own calm. You were trying to honor Elena's memory, the way you understood it. I can respect that, even if I disagree with your methods. Maria turned to Sofia. Mia, I hope you can forgive me someday. I love you, and I always will. Sofia studied her aunt's face, seeing genuine regret there. I don't understand why you did this, Tia Maria, but I know you thought you were protecting me. Maybe we can talk about that sometime, when it doesn't feel so much like you're trying to take me away from Papa. I'd like that, Maria said, then looked back at Marco. The judge mentioned visitation rights. I don't want to be a burden, but I would like to be part of Sofia's life, if you'll allow it. Marco glanced at Sofia, who nodded slightly. Elena would want Sofia to know her family, he said. We can work something out. As Maria left with her attorney, Patricia Kim gathered Marco, Sofia, and Catherine for a brief strategy session. The adoption process should be straightforward given the circumstances, she explained. The court clearly wants this resolved quickly. As for the international travel, we'll need to prepare detailed proposals. But Judge Warren seemed receptive to legitimate educational opportunities. What about the European trip? Sofia asked anxiously. We'll apply for approval once the adoption is finalized, Patricia said. With the documentation Catherine has assembled about conservatory opportunities and educational value, I'm optimistic the court will approve it. Outside the courthouse, they stood in the drizzle for a moment, processing the emotional whiplash of the past few days. Marco felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, as if he'd been holding his breath for weeks and could finally exhale. So what happens now? Catherine asked. Now we go home, Marco said, looking at Sofia. We finish the adoption paperwork. We prepare a proper proposal for European travel, and we figure out how to move forward as a legally recognized family. Sofia bounced slightly on her toes, energy returning as the stress of the hearing faded. And then we plan the most amazing educational journey ever documented in family court history? Catherine laughed, the first genuine laughter Marco had heard from her since Maria's ambush in Portland. I think we can manage that. As they walked toward the parking garage where Catherine's Mercedes waited, Marco felt something shifting inside. Him not just relief, but a new kind of confidence. They had faced the worst-case scenario and emerged intact. They had proved that their unconventional family was strong enough to withstand legal challenges. financial pressures, and social expectations. "Papa," Sofia said as they reached the car, "I have something to tell you." Marco felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it, Mia?" Sofia smiled, the first completely carefree expression he'd seen from her in days. "Yesterday, while we were waiting for the judge's decision, I got an email from Dr. Volkova. The Moscow Conservatory wants me to audition for their summer intensive program. Via video submission." "Sofia, that's wonderful," Catherine exclaimed. "But here's the really amazing part," Sofia continued. "She said that if I'm accepted, they have connections with conservatories throughout Europe that offer year-round programs for exceptional students. Real programs, Papa, with full scholarships and legitimate academic credentials." Marco stared at his daughter, seeing Elena's dreams reflected in her excited face. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that maybe our European adventure could be more than just educational travel," Sofia said carefully. "Maybe it could be the beginning of my real musical education. Maybe everything that's happened Catherine's offer, Maria's challenge, this court case, maybe it was all leading to this opportunity." Catherine was already pulling out her phone. "I'll contact Heinrich Muller about the restoration work in Munich. If Sofia's going to be studying in Europe, we should establish your professional credentials there as well." As they drove out of Portland, heading south toward home and the future they would build together, Marco thought about Elena's final letter to Sofia, her confidence that he would guide their daughter toward her highest potential, her trust that he would know when to hold on and when to let her soar. For the first time since Elena's death, Marco felt equal to that trust. They had faced the ultimate test of their family bonds and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, adoption paperwork, court approvals, international relocations, or the simple complexities of raising a gifted teenager, they would face them together. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to choose. And for a man who had spent 3 years afraid to dream beyond the boundaries of his small coastal town, that freedom felt like the greatest victory of all. 6 months after the courthouse victory that had nearly torn their family apart, Marco stood in the courtyard of a centuries-old villa outside Vienna, watching Sofia practice piano through the tall windows of what had once been a nobleman's music room. The sound of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 drifted across the Austrian countryside, her interpretation now layered with the technical sophistication that came from studying with masters who understood both the mathematics and the soul of music. Catherine emerged from the villa's stone archway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the contented expression of someone whose life had found its proper rhythm. "Heinrich says the 1955 Mercedes is responding beautifully to your work," she said, settling beside Marco on an ancient stone bench. "He's convinced you have some kind of mechanical intuition that can't be taught." Marco smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. "It's not intuition. It's just learning to listen to what the machines are trying to tell you." He gestured toward the villa's converted garage, where he'd spent the morning restoring a vintage car that would soon grace the Concours d'Elegance in Monaco. These old European cars speak a different language than American engines, but the conversation is the same. "And how do you like the conversation?" "I love it," Marco admitted. "Heinrich was right. This work pays better than anything I could have imagined back home. But more than that, it feels like I'm finally using abilities I didn't know I had." Through the window, Sofia's practice session had shifted to something. Marco recognized Elena's lullaby, but arranged now for piano and violin. She was preparing for a performance with the Vienna Youth Orchestra, where the piece would premiere as her first published composition. "She's remarkable," Catherine said, following his gaze. "Dr. Brennan says Sofia has progressed faster in 4 months than most students do in 2 years. It's like she was starving for this kind of instruction and didn't even know it," Marco replied. "Sometimes I watch her in these master classes, surrounded by students from all over the world, And I can barely believe this is the same girl who was practicing alone in our apartment above the garage. She's still the same girl, Catherine corrected gently. She just finally has the resources to become who she was always meant to be. The adoption paperwork had been finalized 3 weeks after their return from Portland, with Judge Warren personally signing the documents that made Marco legally what he had always been emotionally, Sofia's father. The European travel approval had taken longer, requiring detailed educational plans, emergency protocols, and regular check-ins with both the court and Sofia's online academic program. But by February, they had been cleared for their extended European journey. The reality had exceeded even Catherine's ambitious plans. Sofia was enrolled in the Vienna Conservatory's prestigious Young Artist program while maintaining her American high school credits through carefully supervised online coursework. Marco had established himself as a restoration specialist with clients throughout Austria and Germany, his reputation growing through Heinrich's professional network. Catherine had rediscovered her love of music through teaching and mentoring, her damaged hands gradually healing enough to play supporting roles in Sofia's performances. "Marco," Catherine said quietly, "there's something I want to discuss with you." The serious tone in her voice made him turn from watching Sofia. "What is it?" Catherine reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Marco's heart skip several beats. "I know this might seem premature, given that we've only known each other for 7 months. But, Catherine," Marco interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me finish," she said with a nervous smile. "I've been thinking about what constitutes a proper foundation for marriage. Financial compatibility, shared values, mutual respect, genuine affection. We have all of those. But most importantly, we've proven we can weather crisis together, that we can put Sofia's needs ahead of our own desires, that we can build something beautiful out of difficult circumstances." She opened the box to reveal 2 rings, one a simple but elegant solitaire diamond, the other a masculine band that would complement the chain around Marco's neck where Elena's ring still rested. "I'm not asking you to forget Elena or to pretend our relationship is the same as what you had with her," Catherine continued. "I'm asking if you're willing to build something new together, something that honors both our pasts while creating a future for all 3 of us." Marco stared at the rings, his mind racing through the journey that had brought them to this moment. 7 months ago, he'd been a struggling widower, afraid to dream beyond the boundaries of his small town. Now he was a successful craftsman living in Europe, watching his daughter flourish in ways he'd never imagined possible, and being offered a love he'd thought might never come again. "Yes," he said simply, then cleared his throat and tried again. "Yes, Catherine, I want to marry you. I want to build that future together." The kiss that followed was witnessed by a 16-year-old girl who had stopped playing piano to watch her father propose to the woman who had transformed all their lives. Sofia's delighted squeal from the music room sent startled birds flying. From the villa's ancient eaves, the wedding took place 3 weeks later in the same Austrian village where they'd been living. A simple ceremony in a church that had performed marriages for 8 centuries. Sofia played Elena's lullaby as Catherine walked down the aisle, the melody now completed and perfected, a song of love that had survived loss and bloomed into something even more beautiful. Maria attended via video call from Los Angeles. Her relationship with Sofia slowly healing through weekly conversations that had evolved from awkward obligation to genuine affection. She'd even begun planning a visit to Austria for Sofia's summer performance with the Vienna Youth Orchestra. Heinrich served as Marco's best man, having become both mentor and friend over the months of working together. Dr. Brennan, from the conservatory, performed the honors for Catherine, representing the musical community that had embraced Sofia so completely. But it was Sofia herself who provided the ceremony's most moving moment. Stepping forward during the exchange of vows to present, Catherine with a special gift sheet music for a new composition titled Family Waltz, written specifically for piano, violin, and the restored 1928 Steinway grand piano that would be Catherine's wedding present to Sofia. I wanted to write something that represented how we sound together, Sofia explained to the small gathering. 3 different instruments that create harmony when they're played with love and trust. As they danced to Sofia's waltz at their reception, in the villa's candlelit dining room, Marco marveled at the way their lives had woven together. Catherine's arms around him felt familiar now, comfortable, while Sofia's laughter from the adjoining room promised years of family joy ahead. "Do you ever miss home?" Catherine asked as they swayed to their daughter's music. Marco considered the question, thinking about the garage that sat empty but maintained by neighbors, the small apartment that waited for their eventual return, the familiar rhythms of small-town life that had bounded his world for 52 years. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he said honestly. "But this," he gestured around the room where Heinrich was teaching, Sofia, a traditional Austrian folk dance, while Dr. Brennan accompanied them on accordion, "this feels like home too. Different, but real. And when Sofia's old enough to make her own choices about where to live and study, then we'll support whatever she decides and we'll figure out where we belong together," Marco said. "That's what families do. They adapt to help each member flourish." Later that evening, as the last guests departed and Sofia headed to bed, clutching her acceptance letter to the Royal College of Music's summer intensive program in London, Marco and Catherine stood on the villa's terrace, looking out over the moonlit Austrian countryside. "Elena would approve," Marco said quietly, touching the chain around his neck where both wedding rings now rested, hers from the past, Catherine's from the future, both symbols of love that had shaped him into the man he'd become. "I think she would," Catherine agreed. "I think she'd be proud of the father you've been and the man you've become." Marco pulled his wife closer, still marveling at that word wife and at the way love had found him again when he'd least expected it. Through the open windows, he could hear Sofia practicing one last piece before sleep, her music floating across the Austrian night like a promise that some dreams, when nurtured with love and courage, could grow beyond anything their dreamers dared imagine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Sofia's audition preparations, Marco's next restoration project, Catherine's piano students, the ongoing dance of building a family from 3 people who had found each other across continents and circumstances. But tonight, surrounded by the music of his daughter and the warmth of his wife's presence, Marco felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing that love, like the finest engines and the most beautiful melodies, could always be restored to its full potential with patient hands and an open heart. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another in a life that had become an adventure worth living.